The sale on cabbage was 40% off, and that was the whole reason Saitama was in that parking lot at 11:40 at night instead of asleep like a normal person. He'd read the flyer twice to make sure he wasn't misreading it. 40% off cabbage was not a thing that happened. 40% off cabbage was the kind of thing that happened once, maybe, in a man's whole life, and he was not going to be the guy who slept through it. So he'd grabbed his canvas bag, put on the jumpsuit because it was the only clean thing in his closet, and walked to the store. He never made it inside. There was a manhole cover in the middle of the crosswalk that he was 90% sure hadn't been there yesterday, and it wasn't sitting flush with the street. It was tilted, like something underneath had shoved it half out of its socket. Saitama looked at it. He looked at the store, glowing warm and yellow 40 feet away, doors sliding open for an old woman with a cart. He looked back at the manhole. He should have just walked around it. Instead, because some habits from being a hero for fun never fully die, even 3 years retired, he crouched down to push the cover back into place so nobody's kid rode a bike into it and broke their neck. The second his palm touched the metal, the ground didn't feel like ground anymore. It felt like falling through a curtain made of static, and then it felt like nothing, and then his knees hit concrete hard enough that he heard it before he felt it, and when he opened his eyes the store was gone, the crosswalk was gone, and he was crouched in an alley that smelled like wet garbage and something coppery underneath it. Rain needling down through a sky the color of a healing bruise. He stood up, patted himself down, checked the bag. The eggs were fine, small miracles. "Okay," he said to the empty alley, in the tone of a man reviewing a receipt for an error. That's new. He'd fallen through worse. Monster dimensions, collapsing buildings. One memorable afternoon where a cosmic being had tried to erase the concept of Saitama from causality itself, which had been mildly inconvenient and mostly just annoying because it made him late for a ramen shop's happy hour. This felt different in a way he couldn't immediately name. Not dangerous different, just wrong different, like a note played slightly flat. The air had a weight to it. The neon sign flickering red over a bar across the street said something in a font that looked like it wanted to be scary about it. He started walking, because standing in a strange alley accomplished nothing, and because somewhere in this city there was presumably also a grocery store, and the cabbage sale, if it existed here, would not last forever. He made it 11 steps before the three of them dropped out of the fire escape above him. They landed in a loose triangle around him, silent, which he had to admit was a nice trick. Most muggers stomped in like they wanted applause. These three didn't so much as scuff their boots. The one in front was young, maybe 20 in the face, wearing a leather jacket 2 sizes too big, and an expression of pure, hungry delight, like Saitama was a vending machine that had just given him extra change. The other two flanked wide, patient, watching with the kind of stillness that didn't belong in anything human. Well, the kid said, and his voice had a wet edge to it Saitama didn't like. "Lost, little man?" Saitama looked at him, looked at the other two, did a slow, unimpressed once-over of all three, the way he'd look at a menu, with nothing on it he wanted. "I'm looking for a grocery store," he said. "You guys know one around here that's open? Preferably with a produce sale." The kid blinked. Whatever answer he'd been braced for, that wasn't it. He recovered fast, though, grinning wide enough to show teeth that weren't sitting right in his gums anymore. Too long, too white, pressing down over his bottom lip. "Grocery store's closed," the kid said. "But I got something for you." He moved. Saitama had seen fast before. He'd fought things that broke the sound barrier as a warm-up, things whose punches arrived before the sound of the swing did. This kid was fast the way a normal person was fast if you gave them a really good adrenaline rush. Quick, sure. Quicker than anyone Saitama had met back on his side of that manhole cover who wasn't wearing a cape. But it still looked, to him, like the kid was moving through syrup. He watched the whole thing happen in mundane, unhurried detail. The crouch, the leap, the arm cocking back, the mouth opening too wide, fangs catching the neon light. He caught the kid's wrist between 2 fingers before it reached his throat. Didn't squeeze. Didn't need to. The kid's face did something complicated. Confusion first, then real fear, cutting fast through all that hunger. He yanked. Nothing happened. He was strong, stronger than his frame had any right to be. Strong enough that Saitama could actually feel a little resistance in his own arm for once, which was novel enough that he raised an eyebrow. "Huh," Saitama said. "You've got a decent grip. Not enough, though. What are you? Just a guy who wants cabbage." Saitama said, and let go of the wrist. The kid stumbled back a step, cradling his arm like it had been crushed even though Saitama hadn't applied more pressure than you'd use to hold a pencil. The other two had gone very still. One of them, a woman with close-cropped hair and eyes that reflected the neon wrong, too flat, too bright, took a slow step back toward the mouth of the alley. Some old animal part of her, buried under whatever she'd become, was screaming at her to run, and for once in a very long life she was inclined to listen. The kid didn't listen. The kid had been dead. Properly dead, the mortal kind, for exactly 6 weeks. Embraced by a sire who'd since skipped town owing debts to half the Anarch coalition. And in 6 weeks he had learned exactly one lesson about being a vampire. That everything smaller than him was food, and everything that looked like food that fought back just meant a better meal. He didn't know yet that some rules had exceptions. He was about to. He came in again, faster this time. A snarl replacing the grin, claws where fingers should be. And Saitama, mostly just trying to end this so he could go find that store, put one knuckle against his forehead and pushed. He didn't punch. He wanted to be clear with himself about that later, when he thought back on it. He pushed. The same amount of force he'd used to keep a screen door from swinging into his face. Barely a flick. The kid didn't fly backward. The kid didn't hit the alley wall. The kid simply wasn't there anymore, and the wall 40 feet behind where he'd been standing cracked in a spiderweb radiating out from a point roughly forehead height, and the air went thick and coppery and full of a fine reddish mist that drifted down like the world's worst confetti and then, over the space of about 4 seconds, kept drifting and thinning and dispersing into absolutely nothing at all. No body, no blood on the pavement, just dust, settling into the cracks of the alley floor, and a coat, empty, deflated, sliding off the top of a dumpster where it had apparently been flung by the very edge of the shockwave. Saitama looked at the coat. Looked at the 2 remaining vampires, both of whom had stopped breathing, which he found a little odd, and then decided not to think about too hard. Was that supposed to happen? He asked, gesturing at the dust with his free hand. Because that seems like it's not supposed to happen. Neither of them answered. The woman was already running. Not walking, not backing away, sprinting flat out down the alley and around the corner in a blur that would have impressed Saitama on a slower day. And the third one, a heavy-set man who hadn't said a word this whole time, turned and went the other direction just as fast, vanishing over a fence in a single fluid leap that left splinters where his hands had touched. Saitama stood alone in the alley with a cracked wall, a pile of settling dust and a very confused expression. "Okay," he said again, to nobody. "That's definitely new." 3 miles away, in a sub-basement that didn't appear on any building schematic filed with the city of Los Angeles, a wall of analog monitors flickered from static into grainy black and white footage, fed by a camera bolted under a fire escape that had, until 90 seconds ago, been showing nothing but rain. Desmond Okafor leaned in close enough that the blue-white light carved harsh shadows into a face that hadn't looked fully human in over a century. He watched the footage loop, watched it again, watched the moment where Marcus Ruiz, 20 years old forever now, 6 weeks a child, a smart-mouthed kid who used to run deliveries for a taco place on Alvarado before his sire found him, simply ceased. Not staked, not burned, not torn apart in the standard, awful, familiar ways Des had cataloged 1,000 times over 100 years of watching this city eat its young. Erased. One motion, and the frame where Marcus existed became the frame where he didn't, and the wall behind him did the work of a grenade. Des pressed a button. Somewhere down miles of cable and tunnel, in a nest 3 warrens over, a phone that only rang for exactly one reason began to buzz. "Yeah," said a voice on the other end, thick with sleep it didn't need but kept out of habit. "We've got a problem," Des said, in the warm, unhurried rasp that had talked half the kindred underworld of Los Angeles through their worst nights. "Might be the good kind of problem. Might be the kind that ends the city. Grab a coat. You're gonna want to see this before I tell the prince." Isabel Reyes did not like being woken up at midnight for anything short of a Sabbat incursion, but she'd learned a long time ago that when Des Okafor called instead of texted, you answered, because Des didn't waste voice on nothing. She stood now at the mouth of the alley with her jacket collar up against rain that had picked up to a hard, steady drum, staring at a wall with a crater in it the size of a manhole cover, radiating cracks in a pattern that looked less like impact and more like the wall had simply decided to fail all at once. In perfect concentric rings, from a single point at head height. No blood, no body. A thin, near-invisible film of gray dust settling in every crack of the alley floor, already washing away in the rain. "Talk to me," she said. Des crouched by the coat still crumpled on the dumpster, turning it over without touching it directly, using 2 fingers wrapped in a handkerchief pulled from some interior pocket that shouldn't have fit a handkerchief, and somehow always did. "Marcus Ruiz," Des said. "Bruja. Out of Tomas Ruiz's line. Well, was. There isn't a was anymore, there's just isn't. 1 hit. I've got him on tape, Isabel. 1 hit. No visible windup, and the kid goes from standing to gone in 1 frame of footage. Frame before, he's there. Frame after, he's dust and the wall's coming apart like it got hit with a truck. Diablerie, no aura burst, no vitae flare. If somebody diablerized him, it didn't look like any diablerie I've ever recorded. And I've recorded a lot of diablerie, Isabel. This looked like..." He paused, searching, and as Okafor did not often pause searching for a word. It looked like the wall was an afterthought, like the guy doing it wasn't even trying. Isabel crouched next to the crater, running 2 fingers along one of the radiating cracks. "Solid concrete, reinforced brick behind it, built to code 70 years ago to survive an earthquake, not survive an earthquake tonight. Witnesses? 2 more kindred on scene. Both ran. Both are currently refusing to answer their phones, which tells you plenty on its own. And..." Des tapped a small evidence bag, inside which sat a single grainy printed still from the security footage, blown up as far as the resolution allowed before dissolving into noise. It showed a short, bald, unremarkable man in what looked, absurdly, like a yellow jumpsuit, 1 arm extended, expression flat as still water. That's your guy. That's the whole guy." Isabel stared at the printout for a long moment. A man who looked like he sold insurance. A man who looked, if she was being honest, like nobody at all. The kind of face you'd forget was in the room with you. "He's got a shopping bag," she said. "Yeah," Des said. "I noticed that too." She stood, wiping her palm dry on her jeans. Though it hadn't gotten wet, mind already running through the list of things this could be and discarding most of them. Not a hunter. Hunters didn't dust kindred without a trace and leave the body's belongings behind, out of what looked disturbingly like courtesy. Not Sabbat, too clean, too quiet, no ritual mess, no war cry. Not a rival Camarilla enforcer settling a private score. Nobody in the city had a hitter who could do that to a wall with what the tape suggested was a light tap. That left a column of things she genuinely did not want to be true, which started with elder nobody's ever heard of and got worse from there. "Get this to the prince," she said. "Tonight. Not in the morning, not at the next scheduled briefing. Tonight, Des. Wake him up if you have to." "He's not gonna love that. He's gonna love it less," Isabel said, already turning to walk the length of the alley, eyes scanning rooftops, fire escapes, the mouth of every side street. If this thing does that to something with a pulse next. Marcus Voss did not, in fact, love being woken at midnight. And he loved it even less once he'd watched the tape 3 times through in his study. Robe cinched over silk pajamas that cost more than most mortals made in a month. Gold signet ring turning slow and absent between 2 fingers. He watched a boy he'd approved for embrace, reluctantly, on a sire's petition he'd half regretted signing off on. Simply stop existing. He watched the wall come apart around the absence of him like the world itself had flinched. "Play it again," he said. Isabel, standing at parade rest by the study door with rain still drying in her hair, did not point out this was the 4th time. Des, projected in grainy black and white on the wall screen via a feed Voss still didn't fully trust or understand, obliged anyway. They watched Marcus Ruiz die again. Watched the wall crack in perfect, silent rings. Watched a man in a yellow jumpsuit lower his arm, tilt his head slightly at the drifting dust, and say something the audio hadn't caught, before turning and walking calmly out of frame, with a canvas shopping bag swinging gently at his side, as though he had somewhere to be. Voss stopped the ring on his finger. That was the tell, if you knew him. Isabel knew him, had served as his sheriff for 11 years, had learned every one of his tells the hard way. The ring stopped turning when Marcus Voss had made up his mind about something. "Los Angeles has stood," he said quietly, "against Sabbat packs. against a Malkavian anti-tribu who convinced half of Hollywood it was 1929 for 6 months running, against things from Quajian territory that I will not discuss even in this room. We are not a city that panics at a single unexplained death. He turned from the screen, his pale eyes found Isabel's, and for just a moment, just one unguarded, very human moment on a face 300 years past being a loud one, she saw something under the composure that looked almost like the fear she'd felt standing in that alley herself. "Find him," Voss said. "Quietly, first. I want to know what he is before this city decides what he is for us. Bring me answers before you bring me a fight, Sheriff. I would very much like to know what put that wall down before I decide whether we need to put him down. And if it comes to that," Isabel asked, "a fight?" Voss looked back at the frozen frame on the screen. A plain, bored-looking man with his arms still extended, the exact instant a wall failed behind him like a struck bell. "Then God help this city," he said, "because I don't believe we're ready for it." Outside, the rain kept falling on a Los Angeles that did not yet know it had already changed. Somewhere out there under wet neon, a very unimpressed bald man was still looking for a grocery store that sold cheap cabbage, entirely unaware that he had just become the single most important problem in 7 centuries of the city's kindred history. He just wanted the produce sale to still be running by the time he found it. Saitama found a grocery store 40 minutes later. It was not the store with the cabbage sale. It was a 24-hour place called Lucky Star Market, with flickering fluorescent lights and a cashier who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. And it did not have cabbage on sale. And Saitama stood in the produce aisle for a solid 2 minutes, experiencing something that, on a face capable of more expression, might have looked like grief. "No," he said quietly, to a head of regular price cabbage. "Not like this." He bought eggs, rice, and a discount rotisserie chicken that had been sitting under the heat lamp long enough to develop its own weather system, because at this point he was just trying to salvage the night, and walked back out into the rain with his one canvas bag, now considerably heavier. He had no idea where he was. He'd figured that part out about 10 minutes into wandering. The street signs didn't match anything. The cars looked subtly wrong in ways he couldn't name. Older model somehow. And worse, the phone in his pocket had no signal, no maps, no nothing. Just a blank screen telling him it couldn't find a network. He'd tried 3 different intersections before giving up and just walking in a direction that felt like it had more streetlights. He wasn't panicked about it. Saitama did not really do panicked. He'd been dropped into stranger situations. An alternate dimension made entirely of the color orange came to mind, and that one hadn't even had a grocery store. And the constant through all of them had been simple. Eventually, if you kept walking and hitting things that needed to stop existing, something worked itself out. Usually food showed up eventually. Usually someone explained the plot to him, whether he asked or not. The someone, this time, caught up to him outside a 24-hour laundromat 2 blocks later. She didn't sneak. He noticed that. She came around the corner at a normal human walking pace, hands loose at her sides, boots splashing through puddles instead of skating over them like the last 3 had. She had the look of someone who'd made a decision 3 blocks back and was committing to it. A leather jacket dark with rain, close-cropped hair plastered flat, a scar through one eyebrow that had clearly been there a long time. "You," she said, stopping about 15 feet off, "are a hard man to find twice in one night." Saitama looked at her, looked past her, checking for the flanking maneuver, found none, looked back. "Do I know you? No. But I know what you did to Marcus Ruiz 40 minutes ago. And so does my prince. And he'd like a word." She said it flat, professional, the way a cop might read someone their rights. Except her eyes were doing a slow, careful sweep of him the entire time. Hands, stance, the bag, the total absence of anything that looked like a weapon. "I'm not here to start something. I'm here to ask you to come with me." "Who's Marcus Ruiz?" Isabel's jaw tightened a fraction. "Kid you turned to dust in an alley off 6th. "Oh," Saitama considered this. "The vampire." That stopped her for a second. Not the word, but the casual, matter-of-fact way he said it. No fear in it. No disbelief. Like he was confirming a brand of cereal. "You know what he was." "I figured. He had the teeth, and then he stopped being solid when I tapped him, so..." He shrugged, hitching the grocery bag a little higher on his arm. "I've fought vampires before. Different ones. Different world, probably, since none of the street signs here match anything, and my phone doesn't work. Are you also one? Yes. Huh. He studied her with mild interest, the first genuinely new information of the whole conversation. You don't smell weird like he did. He kind of smelled like a wet dog that died. You just smell like rain. Isabel didn't have a response prepared for that, which annoyed her more than it should have. 11 years as sheriff of this city, she'd interrogated Sabbat priests mid-frenzy and talked down Malkavians 3 centuries deep in delusion, and this small, unbothered man with a chicken in a grocery bag had managed to throw her off rhythm inside of 90 seconds. The prince wants to talk, she said again, steadier this time. That's all this is, tonight. A conversation. Nobody's coming at you if you don't come at them first. You've already made it extremely clear that's a bad trade. Saitama tilted his head. Is there food where we're going? I can probably arrange that. Okay. He fell into step beside her, easy as anything, like she'd invited him to walk to the corner instead of into the private sanctum of a 300-year-old vampire prince. Lead the way. I've got nowhere else to be. Also, I should tell you, this chicken's not great. I got it at a weird discount, so if you've got anything better than that where we're going, that'd be nice. Isabel walked half a block in silence, processing the fact that the single most dangerous unknown quantity to enter her city in over a decade was currently complaining, gently, about rotisserie chicken. You're not what I expected, she finally said. Yeah, Saitama said, without any real feeling behind it. I get that a lot. The estate Marcus Voss called home sat behind 2 miles of winding private road in the hills above the city, a place that had been a robber baron's mansion in the 1920s and had quietly changed hands and species of owner 3 times since without a single realtor ever knowing it. Isabel led Saitama through wrought iron gates that opened without visible staff, past a garden gone slightly too perfect to be natural, up marble steps into a foyer with a ceiling 2 stories high, and portraits along the walls that, if you looked closely, spanned 2 centuries of the same handful of faces in different fashions. Saitama looked at none of it with any particular interest. He was more interested in the smell coming from somewhere deeper in the house, something roasting, herbs, garlic, and he said so, which made the ghoul stationed at the door nearly drop the tray she was carrying. That smells good, Saitama said. Is that for the vampires? Can vampires even eat food? Some can process small amounts, sir, the ghoul managed, staring at him like he might detonate. Huh, weird. Okay. Voss received them in his study, standing this time, robe replaced by a charcoal suit despite the hour, every crease of it perfect, hands folded behind his back in the exact pose of a man who had rehearsed looking unbothered for 300 years and had gotten very, very good at it. Isabel had briefed him twice on the walk up, and he'd absorbed every detail with the same still, unreadable expression. And it wasn't until the doors opened and he actually laid eyes on the man from the security footage that something flickered across his face. Not fear, not yet, but a kind of careful, deliberate recalibration. The look of a chess player realizing the board had an extra piece nobody had told him about. Mr. Voss paused, realizing he had no name to offer. Saitama. Mr. Saitama, thank you for coming. Sure. Saitama glanced around the study, the shelves of old books, the fireplace, the general sense of a room designed to make people feel small, with the mild curiosity of a man in a furniture showroom. Is there food? Isabel said there might be food. Voss blinked. Actually blinked. 300 years of composure, catching very slightly on the question. Yes, of course. He nodded once to a ghoul hovering by the door, who vanished immediately, gratefully, glad for an excuse to leave the room. I understand you've had, an eventful evening. You could say that. I got dragged through some kind of hole in the ground looking for cabbage and ended up in a city where none of the street signs make sense and a kid with fangs tried to eat me. So yeah, eventful. Saitama found a chair he liked the look of. Not the one clearly meant for him, facing Voss's desk like a job interview, but a comfortable-looking armchair off to the side, and sat down in it, setting his grocery bag carefully on the floor beside him, like the most important thing in the room. You're the guy in charge here? I am the prince of this city, yes. Cool. Do you know how I get home? Because honestly, that's my whole priority right now. I've got groceries that are gonna go bad. Voss exchanged a brief look with Isabel, who gave the world's smallest shrug, the universal gesture of I don't know either. This is your problem now. I don't, Voss said carefully. have an immediate answer for you. I would need to consult certain resources, certain members of my court who study matters beyond the mundane." He moved to sit behind his desk, folding his hands atop it, settling into the posture of a man conducting a negotiation. Even though every instinct in him, 3 centuries of instinct, honed across 2 world wars and a dozen quieter catastrophes, was screaming that negotiation might not be the correct framework for whatever was sitting in his armchair eating, now, the small plate of hors d'oeuvres a ghoul had nervously delivered. "First, I'd like to understand what happened tonight. Marcus Ruiz was one of mine. Young, foolish, but mine. And my city has rules about how death is handled here. Rules I take seriously. He jumped me," Saitama said, around a mouthful of something involving smoked salmon that he seemed to be enjoying more than the conversation. "Tried to bite my neck. I stopped him." "You stopped him?" Voss repeated. The wall behind him took considerably more damage than a man simply being stopped would suggest. Saitama shrugged. "I barely touched him. I don't really know how to hit people gently anymore, honestly. I used to be able to, kind of, back before I got this strong, but now everything's just sort of all the way. It's annoying actually, breaks a lot of furniture." He said this with the weary tone of a man complaining about a minor, ongoing inconvenience, not a superlative fact about himself. "I didn't mean for him to just, turn into dust like that. I figured he'd just fly into a wall and get knocked out, like a person. Didn't expect the whole disappearing thing." Voss's ring had gone still on his finger. "You struck him," he said slowly, "with what you consider a light touch, and he was annihilated." "I mean, yeah?" Saitama tilted his head, and for the first time something like genuine puzzlement crossed his flat features. The specific frustration of a man circling back to a very old, very tired subject. "Look, I get that this probably sounds like bragging or whatever, but it's really not, I promise. It's honestly the opposite of fun. I trained really hard, a long time ago, to become a hero. Did like 1,000 push-ups, 1,000 sit-ups, 100 squats, 10-kilometer run. Every single day, no breaks, no air conditioning, because I couldn't afford it. Did that for like a year and a half." He picked at another canapé. "And then I just got strong. All the way strong. Like, I don't actually know how strong, because nothing's ever tested it. I've fought gods. I've fought things that ate whole planets for fun. I punched a meteor once, cracked it in half before it hit the ground. Nothing's ever really pushed back. It's kind of the worst thing that ever happened to me, honestly, if I'm being real with you." The room was very quiet. Isabel, standing near the door, felt something cold settle low in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature of the house. She'd fought Sabbat elders who talked about their strength like a boast, a threat, a thing to be wielded and displayed. She had never in over 100 years of unlife heard someone describe God-slaying, world-ending power the way most people described a chronic illness. Tired, resigned, faintly, achingly bored by it. Voss, for his part, had gone very still. The particular stillness of a man doing rapid, silent math and not liking any of the numbers he was arriving at. "You're telling me," he said, carefully, each word placed like a foot on thin ice, "that the force which reduced Marcus Ruiz to dust and cracked a load-bearing wall was, to you, an act of restraint. I mean, kind of. I really was trying not to hurt him too bad. It just sort of happens like that now. I've stopped really being able to help it." Saitama looked up, and for a moment there was something almost apologetic in his flat expression. Not guilt exactly, but a genuine, weary awareness of the gap between what he meant to do and what actually happened whenever his body committed to doing anything at all. "Sorry about your wall, and your guy. I really didn't mean for him to just stop existing like that. That part sucked. I don't love that part." Voss opened his mouth, closed it, turned the ring on his finger, once, slowly, and then made himself stop. 3 centuries of ruling this city had taught him a great many things. How to read a lie in a flicker of the eyes. How to weigh a threat by the way it carried itself into a room. How to know, with near certainty, when someone across a table from him was exaggerating their capabilities to buy leverage. Every one of those instincts, honed across decades of jihad and court intrigue and 2 mortal world wars observed from careful distance, was telling him something he did not want to hear. This man was not exaggerating. This man did not seem to know how to exaggerate, or lie, or perform strength the way every kindred elder Voss had ever met performed it. Because performance implied effort, implied theater, implied the specific vanity of a creature that had built its identity around being powerful. Saitama simply was the fact he was describing, the way a mountain simply was tall, without any awareness that the description carried weight. That, more than the wall, more than the dust, more than the flat and uninterested way he described ending a young vampire's whole existence, was what turned Marcus Voss's stomach cold. "I see," Voss said, very quietly, and set both hands flat on the desk to keep them from doing anything else. "Sheriff Reyes, I think, perhaps, it would be prudent to bring in additional counsel on this matter, tonight, if she's available." "The Primogen?" Isabel asked. "Not yet." Voss's eyes stayed on Saitama, who had moved on to a second canapé, entirely unbothered by the tension thickening the room around him like weather. "I want Adelina Cross. If we have something in this city that might actually understand what's sitting in that chair, it's her, and I would very much like her opinion before I decide how the Camarilla of Los Angeles proceeds from here." Isabel didn't ask who that was in front of their guest. She simply nodded once, sharp, and stepped out to make the call, leaving Voss alone in the study with a bored, unassuming man in a yellow jumpsuit who had, 40 minutes ago, and without any apparent effort, erased one of his children from existence, and was now contentedly working his way through a plate of hors d'oeuvres, like a man at a mildly disappointing office party. "Mr. Saitama," Voss said, after a long moment, choosing his words the way a man tests ice before putting his full weight on it. "I want to be transparent with you, because I suspect very little else will work. You have, tonight, without any apparent intention to do so, demonstrated a level of power this city, this world perhaps, is not equipped to contain, should it ever come to that. I don't say that as a threat. I say it because I would like very much for it to never come to that." Saitama looked up from the canapés, chewing thoughtfully. "Yeah," he said. "That tracks. It usually goes that way." He swallowed, considered the prints across the desk from him, the perfect suit, the careful stillness, the very old, very tired weight sitting behind those pale eyes that Saitama, if he was honest, recognized a little. Not the vampire part, the tired part. "Look, I'm not trying to cause problems for you, man. I really am just trying to find my way home and maybe get a decent meal that isn't gas station chicken. If your people leave me alone, I'll leave them alone. I don't want to fight. I never really do. I just seem to end up in them anyway." Voss studied him for a long moment, the plain, unremarkable face, the total absence of threat display, the canvas grocery bag still sitting patiently by the chair like the most precious cargo in the room. "I would like to believe that," he said finally. "I am simply not certain, yet, that belief will be enough." Outside the study doors, down the long marble hall, Isabel Reyes stood with her phone pressed to her ear, waiting for it to connect, watching rain streak the tall windows of a house that had survived a century of the city's worst nights, and thinking, with a cold certainty she couldn't shake, that whatever Adelina Cross was about to tell them, it was not going to make anyone in this house sleep easier before dawn. Adelina Cross arrived a little before 2 in the morning, and she did not use the front door. Saitama noticed the temperature change first, a faint drop in the study, subtle enough that a normal person might have blamed a draft, except no window was open and no vent was running. Voss noticed it too, and straightened slightly in his chair, the way a man might straighten for a superior he respected but did not quite trust. She came through the wall, not dramatically, no flash, no crack of stone, nothing like what Saitama had accidentally done to that alley wall a few hours earlier. One moment there was a bookshelf against the east wall of the study, ordinary, packed with leather spines. The next moment a woman was simply standing in front of it, having apparently stepped out of the shelf itself the way a person steps out of a doorway, straightening the sleeve of a dark blue coat like the trip had been mildly inconveniencing. She looked, if anything, unremarkable. Mid-30s in appearance, dark hair pulled back tight, sharp, intelligent features, the kind of face that belonged behind a university lectern rather than emerging from solid wood. It was only when she turned her eyes on Saitama that anything about her read as wrong. They were a pale, washed-out gray, and they did not blink nearly often enough. "Mr. Voss," she said, voice cool and precise, an accent underneath it that had been sanded down by a very long time spent somewhere other than wherever it started. You said this was urgent. I trust it is, given the hour. Adelina, Voss rose from his desk. Thank you for coming so quickly. This is, he gestured, and seemed, briefly, to run out of words for how to introduce the man currently working through his second glass of orange juice in the armchair. This is Mr. Saitama. Adelina studied him for a long moment. Saitama looked back, unbothered, mildly curious about the wall-walking trick. You did that thing where you come out of walls, he said. Neat. Do all vampires learn that eventually, or is that a special one? Auspex and obfuscate, layered with a Tremere working of my own design, she said, absently, still watching him with the intent, unblinking focus of a woman reading fine print. Most cannot do it. I can. It is not relevant to why I am here. She turned to Voss. Tell me what happened. All of it. Do not summarize, Voss told her. Isabel added detail where it mattered. The footage, the wall, the total absence of vitae discharge in Dez's readings. The casual, weary way Saitama had described his own strength, as though reciting a doctor's diagnosis he'd long since stopped hoping would change. Adelina listened without interrupting, her strange gray eyes flicking, twice, to Saitama himself, lingering there in a way that made even Isabel, who did not spook easily, feel the hair on her arms rise. When Voss finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Adelina crossed to stand in front of Saitama's chair, close enough that under any other circumstance it would have been a threat display, a prince's enforcer looming over a suspect. Saitama just looked up at her, patient, like a man waiting for a doctor to finish reading his chart. May I try something? She said. It was not really phrased as a question. Depends what it is. Auspex, a reading. I want to look at what you are. Not what you say you are. What you are. At the level where lies don't reach. It will not hurt. Most beings do not even notice. Saitama shrugged. Sure, go for it. I've had weirder stuff done to me. Adelina's gray eyes fixed on his, and something shifted in the air of the room. A pressure, subtle, the sensation of being looked at by something that saw considerably more than a face. Isabel had felt Adelina do this before, on suspects, on liars, on one memorable occasion on a Sabbat spy who'd confessed everything he knew within 4 seconds of that stare landing on him, and she'd learned to recognize the specific stillness that came over Adelina's face while she worked. This time, the stillness lasted exactly 2 seconds before it broke. Adelina staggered back a full step, an actual, physical stumble, heel catching the edge of the rug, one hand flying out to brace against the bookshelf she'd walked out of minutes earlier. Her breath, which she did not technically need, came out of her in a sharp, involuntary rush, and for the first time in the entire encounter her composure cracked entirely, gray eyes wide, staring at Saitama with something that was not quite fear and not quite awe, but sat very close to both. Adelina? Voss was on his feet immediately. What did you see? For a long moment she didn't answer. She was still staring at Saitama, who was looking back at her with mild concern, the specific concern of a man watching someone react badly to something and not being entirely sure what he'd done. You okay? Saitama asked. You kind of went white there. Well, whiter? I looked, Adelina said, very quietly, and her voice had lost its careful precision entirely. For the bottom. The bottom of what? Of you. She straightened slowly, still bracing one hand against the shelf, gathering herself back into something like composure through what was visibly an act of will. Auspex at my level does not simply see a face, Mr. Saitama. It reads potential, capacity. I have used this working on Archons, on Methuselahs who have walked this earth since before Rome had walls, on things sleeping in torpor so deep and so old the city itself is built over their graves without knowing it. There is always a bottom, always a place where the well runs dry, where I can see the edge of what a creature is capable of, however vast that edge might be. She looked at him, and her gray eyes had, for the first time, something in them that looked disturbingly close to fear. I looked into you, and I did not find an edge. I found a floor that kept receding the longer I looked, like staring down a well that has no water in it at all. Only more well. The study had gone very quiet. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to have stilled. That's not a metaphor, Adelina continued, and now she was talking fast. the words spilling out of her with the particular urgency of a woman relaying an emergency. Marcus, I need you to understand what I am telling you. I could not find his limit. In 400 years of using this discipline, I have never once failed to find a limit. Elders lie about their strength to friends, to rivals, to themselves. The power never lies to auspex. It cannot lie to auspex. And this, she gestured helplessly at the man still sitting patiently in the armchair, orange juice glass now empty and set with careful manners on a coaster. This did not lie to me either. I simply could not see far enough to find where it stopped. Does that mean I broke something? Saitama asked, with the mild, faintly guilty tone of a man who just heard a mechanic describe unusual noises coming from his car. No, Adelina said, and let out a short, humorless laugh that had no real humor anywhere near it. No, you didn't break anything. I did. My own read, on my own working, which has never once failed me in 4 centuries. Voss had gone pale as a man already 3 centuries dead could go, which was a specific, bloodless kind of white that Isabel had only seen on him twice before, both times right before he made a decision that reshaped the city's entire power structure. Adelina, he said, low, careful, I need you to tell me plainly, what are we dealing with? Adelina cross-straightened her coat, pulled the last threads of her composure back around herself like a cloak, and looked at Marcus Voss with the flat, grim honesty of 400 years spent learning exactly how bad news needed to be delivered to men who ruled cities. Something we cannot fight our way out of if it decides one night that it wants to, she said. Something that could, if it wished, if it were provoked badly enough, if we made one catastrophic mistake in how we handle the next several nights, end this city, this court, possibly every kindred within 100 miles of where he's sitting, and not even notice it had done so until afterward. She paused. I do not believe it wants to do that. Everything about his account of himself, and frankly his manner in this room, suggests a being profoundly uninterested in violence for its own sake. That is, I suspect, the only reason any of us are still breathing air we don't need to breathe. But Marcus, I need you to understand this is not a threat we managed the way we managed the Sabbat incursion in '09, or the Malkavian who thought he was Nero. This is not a threat. This is a fact of the world now, one that happened to land in our city, and facts of the world do not negotiate. They simply exist, and everything around them has to find a way to exist alongside them, or be removed. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Rain ticked steadily against the tall windows. Isabel found she'd put a hand, unconsciously, on the hilt of the knife at her belt, a gesture as useless as it was instinctive, and she made herself let go of it, feeling faintly foolish. Saitama, for his part, looked between the 3 of them with the patient, faintly awkward expression of a man who has walked into the middle of other people's crisis meeting and isn't sure whether it's rude to ask when lunch is. Look, he said into the silence, I really am sorry about the wall thing. And the kid. I feel bad about that, I want you to know that, even if it doesn't seem like it. But I'm not gonna end your city. I just want to go home and eat something that isn't discount chicken. Is there maybe a wizard? A guy who knows about portals? Somebody who can just point me back at whatever hole I fell through, and I'll be out of your hair by morning. Adelina looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite warmth, nothing so soft as that after 4 centuries of kindred political survival, but something that might have been the beginning of a decision. There are ways to investigate that, she said slowly. Blood sorcery that touches on planar mechanics, crude, by the standards of whatever brought you here, but not nothing. It would take time. Days, possibly weeks, depending on how thoroughly the working that pulled you here was constructed, and whether it left any trace we can trace back. Weeks. Saitama's shoulders dropped a fraction, the closest thing to visible dismay he'd shown all night. Man, my rent's gonna be so behind. In the meantime, Voss said, and his voice had steadied, the shock of Adelina's assessment folding itself back down into the calm, careful calculation that had kept him prince of this city for longer than most princes lasted. I would like to propose an arrangement. Stay. Not as a prisoner. Isabel, you may lower your hand from that knife, it will do exactly nothing regardless. But as a guest of this court, under its protection, while Adelina works to find you a way home. In exchange, I ask only that you extend this city the same courtesy you've shown tonight. Restraint, where restraint is possible. Warning, where it is not. Saitama considered this. considered mostly the plate of hors d'oeuvres, now empty, and the general fact that a house this nice probably had a kitchen that put his apartments to shame. "You got good food here?" he asked. "I can absolutely arrange better food," Voss said, with the flat, exhausted patience of a man who had, over the course of one very long night, come to understand precisely what currency this negotiation actually ran on. "Then yeah, deal." Saitama stuck out a hand, the plain, ordinary gesture landing strangely in a room built on 3 centuries of formal kindred protocol, oaths and boons and blood-sealed promises. Voss looked at the offered hand for a moment, the same hand that had, hours earlier, erased one of his children from existence with what its owner considered a light tap, and then reached out and shook it anyway, because whatever else was true tonight, it was clear that whatever waited on the other side of refusing this man's goodwill would be considerably worse than the risk of accepting it. "Welcome to Los Angeles, Mr. Saitama," Voss said. "Cool. Where's the kitchen?" Across the city, in a warehouse converted into something between a chapel and a war room, Father Elias Thorne was 3 hours into an all-night vigil he hadn't scheduled, kneeling on bare concrete before a wall of hand-copied scripture and older, stranger things scrawled beneath it in a language that predated the church by a considerable margin. When the first of his contacts within the city's anarch-adjacent underworld reached him with a whisper that had traveled fast and gotten stranger with every retelling. A Camarilla child destroyed in a single blow. No ritual, no blade, no fire, just a man's bare hand, and a wall that fell down around the space where a vampire used to be. Thorne rose from his knees slowly, joints that didn't ache the way they should stiff from hours of stillness anyway, out of habit more than necessity, and crossed to the wall of scripture, running one calloused finger down a passage he'd copied out himself, years ago, from a Sabbat archive half-burned and older than the city sitting on top of it now. "And in the last nights a stranger shall walk among the cattle and the damned alike, wearing no crown and claiming no throne, and the antediluvians themselves shall no fear of him, for he shall not be of their blood, nor of God's design, and no right of ours shall touch him." He had always assumed the passage was metaphor. Sabbat scripture was thick with metaphor, layers of it, meant to be argued over in candlelit rooms by men who'd devoted unlives to parsing meaning from apocalyptic fragments nobody could fully translate anymore. Tonight, for the first time in decades of study, Father Elias Thorne wondered if he'd been reading a prophecy instead of a poem. He picked up the phone. There were people who needed to hear about this. His pack, first, and then, eventually, painfully, the archbishop who commanded packs like his across half the western seaboard. A man who did not react well to uncertainty, and reacted worse to threats he couldn't immediately categorize as either weapon or heresy. "Gather the pack," Thorne said, when the call connected. "Something's come to this city that isn't Camarilla, isn't Anarch, and isn't anything I've read about that wasn't written in blood on a wall 300 years old. I want eyes on it. Quietly, for now." He paused, looking back at the scripture on the wall, at a passage he'd copied out as a young initiate, and never once expected to see proven true in his own unlife. "God is testing this city," he said, "and I do not yet know if we're meant to kneel before what's coming, or burn it before it learns what it is." Saitama slept until 2 in the afternoon, which was unusual for him. He was normally an early riser out of sheer habit, 3 years of unemployed mornings spent training before the heat got bad. But the guest suite Voss had given him had blackout curtains thick enough to fool a corpse, and a bed softer than anything he'd slept on in years, and by the time he woke the sun was already well past its peak outside. He found the bathroom, found a stack of clothes someone had apparently procured for him overnight, his exact size, which he decided not to think too hard about how they'd known, and made his way downstairs following the smell of something frying, only to find the kitchen staffed by 2 ghouls who looked at him the way you'd look at an unexploded bomb somebody had asked you to make breakfast for. "Morning," Saitama said. "Or afternoon, I guess. Is there bacon?" There was bacon. There was, in fact, an entire spread that the ghoul staff had clearly been coached, at length, to produce without asking questions. Eggs 3 ways, toast, a fruit plate that put the sad rotisserie chicken from the night before to a shame so total it felt almost personal. Saitama ate like a man who hadn't eaten in a day, which, technically, he hadn't. and was midway through his second plate when Isabel Reyes walked into the kitchen, dressed exactly as she had been the night before, minus the rain. "You're up," she said. "You're not sleeping? Isn't it like vampire bedtime right now?" "Sheriff duties don't stop for sunlight, and I don't burn easy inside stone walls with the shades drawn." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying him with the same assessing look she'd worn the whole of the previous night, except with less immediate alarm behind it, replaced by something more like professional curiosity. "Voss wants to talk logistics with you, figure out what staying here a few weeks actually looks like. But first," she nodded at the window, at the city sprawling gray and hazy beyond the estate's grounds, "I want to show you something, if you're up for it." "Is it food-related?" "No. Is it going to be a fight?" "I genuinely hope not." Saitama shrugged, wiped his mouth, and stood. "Sure, lead the way." She took him downtown, into the beating commercial heart of the city. Streets thick with mortal foot traffic even in daylight. Buses and taxis, and the ordinary churning noise of 11 million people going about lives that had no idea what shared their streets after dark. Isabel drove, an old, unremarkable sedan, windows tinted just enough to matter, and parked on a rooftop garage overlooking a stretch of downtown that, from height, looked almost like any other American skyline. "This is my city," she said, standing at the railing, looking out over it. "Has been for 11 years, since Voss made me sheriff. Before that I fought for it as a Bruja foot soldier for 60 more, back when the Anarchs and the Camarilla were still actively at each other's throats over who got to own these streets." She glanced sideways at him. "You don't seem like you understand what that word means yet. Sheriff, territory. What it costs to hold a piece of ground like this against everything that wants to take it." "Not really, no," Saitama admitted. "I've never really been in charge of anything. I did the hero thing for a while, but that was mostly just, punching stuff. Nobody put me in charge of a city. That's what worries me." Isabel turned fully to face him, and there was something direct in the set of her jaw, something that told him this whole outing had been leading up to exactly this conversation. "Last night, you erased a child of this city because he attacked you, and I understand that self-defense is self-defense. Nobody here is holding that against you. But I need you to understand what almost happened after. If you'd hit back harder, if you'd been even a little less careful, a little less lucky, we could be looking at a war right now. Not a fight, a war. Sabbat packs who'd hear about an uncontained threat and come running to either kill it or recruit it. Other princes up and down the coast sending agents to investigate whether Los Angeles has lost control of its own territory. Every ambitious anarch in the city deciding tonight's the night to make a move while the Camarilla's distracted. She let that sit. This city runs on a very old, very fragile balance, and you walked into the middle of it like a boulder dropped into a pond. I need to know, genuinely, not as a threat, as a real question, do you understand what it means to be that dangerous around people who can't touch you back?" Saitama was quiet for a moment, looking out over the skyline with her, hands in the pockets of the clothes someone had left for him. "Yeah," he said finally, and something in his voice had shifted, gone a little quieter, a little more honest than the flat deadpan he'd worn through most of last night. "I do actually, more than you'd probably guess. Explain it to me. Back home, there's this organization, Hero Association it's called, ranks heroes by threat level, by how strong the monsters are that they can handle. I'm ranked S-class, highest rank there is." He leaned on the railing beside her. "Problem is, I got there so fast, and so completely, that basically nobody at the association actually understands what I can do. There's this other hero, Genos, kid I sort of took under my wing, cyborg, really strong himself, and even he doesn't fully get it, even after training with me for years. There's this whole other hero, guy named King, who's got this reputation as the strongest man alive because everyone assumes he's the one clearing all these disasters. Except it's actually me, every time. Because I get there first and finish it in one hit before anyone even sees what happened. King just happens to show up in the wreckage looking cool, and I've never bothered to correct anybody, because, I don't know, it's fine. I don't really care about the credit." "That sounds lonely," Isabel said, and meant it, surprising herself a little with how easily it came out. "Yeah, it kind of is." Saitama shrugged, the gesture doing a lot of work to undercut how much weight was actually sitting behind the words. "It's not really about the fighting for me anymore. I used to love it. Training, getting stronger, The whole thing was exciting, you know? Every fight felt like it mattered, like I might not win. And then one day I just did win. Every time, no matter what showed up. Aliens, gods, guys who could end the whole planet if they wanted to. I hit them once and it's over, and I don't even feel anything when it happens. No adrenaline, no fear, nothing. Just this, flatness. Like eating the same meal every single day for years and forgetting what food's even supposed to taste like. He looked at her, and there was something almost apologetic in it. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad for me. I'm telling you because I think you're actually asking me something different than are you dangerous? I think you're asking if I'm going to use that on your city because I'm bored, or reckless, or don't care what it costs anybody else. And the answer's no. I know exactly what it costs. It's basically the only thing I do think about anymore, whether I'm about to break something I can't put back together. He paused. I broke a lot of things, early on, before I really got a handle on how strong I'd gotten. Buildings. A stadium. Once. That one wasn't even really my fault. Long story. I've gotten better about it. Doesn't mean I always get it right. Last night, with that kid, I really was trying not to hurt him bad. Didn't work. I felt like garbage about it after, if that means anything to you. Isabel studied him for a long moment, the wind off the parking structure pulling at her jacket, the ordinary churn of the city 60 feet below them, completely unaware of the conversation happening on the roof above. It means something, she said finally. It means more than you probably think it does, actually. I've dealt with a lot of powerful things in this city over the years. Most of them enjoy it. The power, enjoy having it. Enjoy what it lets them get away with. Enjoy the fear in the room when they walk in. You're the first thing I've met in a long time that sounds like it'd trade the whole deal away if it could. Every single day, Saitama said without hesitation, and there was nothing performed about it at all. In a heartbeat. They stood there for a while, in silence, looking out over a skyline neither of them had built, and both of them, in their very different ways, were now responsible for keeping standing. Okay, Isabel said eventually, straightening off the railing. Here's what I want to propose to Voss, and I want your input on it before I do. There's a way to make the next few weeks safer for everybody. You, this city, the Camarilla, all of it. But it means you're not just a guest sitting in a mansion eating breakfast. It means you're visible, known, vouched for publicly in front of the court so nobody mistakes you for an unclaimed threat wandering the streets and decides to take a swing at making a name for themselves. She turned to face him fully. There's a gathering coming up. Elysium, neutral ground, where the whole court meets. Primogen, ranking kindred, all of it, under truce. If Voss presents you there, formally, as a guest under his protection, it closes off about 90% of the ways this could go wrong. Nobody gets to claim ignorance. Nobody gets to say they didn't know who, or what, they were picking a fight with. And the other 10%? Isabel's mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. The other 10% is the part where somebody decides to test you anyway, because that's what this city does to anything new and powerful that walks into a room full of ambitious old monsters. I won't lie to you about that. Elysium enforces peace inside its walls, but it doesn't enforce good sense. And there are people in this city, factions, who are going to hear about you and see either a threat to eliminate or a weapon to recruit before they see anything else. Saitama considered this, looking back out over the city, the ordinary mortal noise of it rising up faint and distant from the streets below. Sounds like it's going to be a whole thing, he said, without much enthusiasm. It is. Will there be food? Isabel actually laughed at that, a short, surprised bark of a sound, the first real laugh he'd gotten out of her since they'd met. Elysium spreads are legendary, actually. Some of the oldest kindred in this city spend more on catering for one night than most restaurants make in a year, just for the prestige of it. Then yeah, count me in. Saitama pushed off the railing, hands back in his pockets, already turning toward the car. Just, warn me if it's the kind of party where people try to bite me. I'd rather know going in. I'll warn you, Isabel said, following him. I doubt it'll help much. This city doesn't really do warnings well. Behind them, the sun was already beginning its long, slow slide toward evening, and somewhere out across the sprawl of Los Angeles, word of a bald man who couldn't be measured was already spreading through channels far beyond the Camarilla's control, into Anarchs' safe houses. into Sabbat war chapels, into the careful, patient ears of things that had been sleeping under this city for far longer than anyone currently walking its streets had been alive. The first night had ended in silence and dust. The first Elysium was about to begin something considerably louder. Elysium, Saitama learned over the 2 days leading up to it, was not so much a place as an idea enforced by very old, very serious rules. The physical location changed depending on circumstance. This time it was the ballroom of a restored 1920s hotel downtown, a place that during daylight hours ran as a perfectly ordinary, if extravagantly priced, event venue, and after dark became something else entirely under a compact that predated the hotel itself by a century. Inside its walls, Isabel explained on the drive over, no blood could be spilled, no discipline could be used in aggression, no grudge could be settled by violence, on pain of consequences severe enough that even the most reckless kindred in the city thought twice. It was the one place in Los Angeles' kindred world where enemies stood in the same room and, for a few hours, behaved. "So it's basically a truce zone," Saitama said, adjusting the collar of a suit jacket someone had tailored for him overnight. Dark, well-cut, entirely unlike anything he'd normally wear, and he'd spent a solid 5 minutes in the mirror deciding he looked ridiculous in it before Isabel had physically walked into the room and told him to stop fidgeting. "It's more than that. It's sacred to most of them. Break Elysium peace, and you're not just making an enemy of whoever you attacked. You're making an enemy of the prince, the Primogen, half the court, and the tradition itself. People have been executed for less. Good to know. So if somebody does try something in there, they won't. Not directly. That's not how it works." Isabel pulled the car into the hotel's underground lot, killing the engine, turning to look at him fully before they got out. "What'll happen instead is subtler. People will approach you. Test you with words instead of fists. See how you react, what you let slip, whether you're someone who can be flattered, provoked, bought, or frightened. Some of them will be genuinely curious. Some of them will already be building a file on you they intend to use later, outside these walls, where the rules don't apply. I need you to treat every single conversation in there like it matters, because it will." Saitama absorbed this with the particular seriousness he reserved for things that actually worried him, which was a short list, and social minefields ranked surprisingly high on it, considerably higher than most physical threats. "So basically don't say anything dumb." "Basically, yes. I'm gonna say something dumb." "Probably," Isabel admitted. "Just try not to make it something that gets somebody killed." The ballroom when they entered was already half full, a slow, deliberate churn of kindred in evening wear, moving through the space with the particular grace of creatures who'd had centuries to perfect the art of looking effortless while doing so. Chandeliers threw warm light across polished floors. A string quartet played somewhere near the far wall, and Saitama noted, with genuine appreciation, that the catering tables running along one side of the room were exactly as extravagant as promised. Towers of shellfish on ice, some kind of elaborate charcuterie spread, silver trays of things he didn't recognize but smelled expensive. He also noted, almost immediately, that every single conversation in the room had gone very slightly quieter the moment he walked in, and that at least 24 sets of eyes had found him and were now doing an extremely poor job of pretending they hadn't. "They know," he murmured to Isabel. "Everyone knows. Word travels fast in this city. Especially the kind of word that involves a Camarilla child getting erased in one hit." She kept her voice low, steady, guiding him with a light hand at his elbow, toward where Marcus Voss stood near the center of the room, in conversation with a cluster of severely dressed older kindred who could only be Primogen. "Just follow Voss's lead when we reach him. He'll make the introduction formal. That matters more than it sounds like it should." Voss caught sight of them approaching and broke off his conversation smoothly, turning to face them with the composed, faintly regal bearing he'd worn like a second skin every time Saitama had seen him. Tonight it was cranked up several notches. This was a performance, Saitama realized. The whole room a stage, and Voss was playing his part with the ease of 3 centuries of practice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Voss said, and his voice carried without seeming to rise, the trained cadence of a man used to commanding rooms. "May I present a guest under my personal protection this evening? This is Mr. Saitama." The room's attention, already half fixed on him, sharpened into something total. Saitama did his best impression of comfortable, which mostly consisted of standing still and not fidgeting with the suit jacket, while Voss continued. He arrived in our city under unusual circumstances 2 nights past, and I extend to him the full courtesy and protection due any guest of this court, for the duration of his stay, which I anticipate will be brief while certain logistical matters are resolved. Voss's pale eyes swept the gathered Primogen, a clear, deliberate signal underneath the polite phrasing. I trust that courtesy will be honored. A ripple went through the assembled kindred. Not open dissent, nothing so crude as that inside Elysium's walls, but a current of something charged and watchful passing from face to face. One of the Primogen, an older man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd been powerful for a very long time and expected everyone in the room to remember it, stepped forward with a thin, cordial smile. Marcus, always a pleasure to meet your discoveries. His eyes moved over Saitama with unhurried, assessing contempt, the specific kind reserved by very old things for whatever they haven't yet decided is worth respecting. Forgive my bluntness, but the rumors circulating about this gentleman's evening 2 nights ago are extraordinary. I confess some skepticism. Marcus Ruiz was young, but he was not without training. For him to simply vanish, from one blow, he let the sentence trail. An invitation dressed as doubt. I'm Julian Ashford, he added, as an afterthought, extending a hand toward Saitama, with the air of a man conferring a favor by doing so. Ventru Primogen. I represent the interests of my clan in this city, and I confess a professional curiosity about a stranger capable of unmaking one of our own so completely. Saitama shook the offered hand, a light, careful grip on Ashford's part, testing, and Saitama, aware now of the game being played, matched it with a normal human handshake. No pressure, no display. Nice to meet you, Saitama said. Sorry about your guy. I really didn't mean for it to go that far. How magnanimous, Ashford said, and there was an edge under the politeness now, thin but unmistakable. Tell me, Mr. Saitama, what is it you do? For a living, I mean. Before whatever brought you to our city. A man doesn't simply happen into this kind of capability without a discipline behind it. Are you a scholar of some obscure martial tradition? A product of some government program, perhaps? I understand the mortal world dabbles in such things these days. I'm a hero, Saitama said, simply, without any apparent awareness of how strange the word landed in a ballroom full of vampires. Well, I was. Registered, licensed, the whole thing. I fight monsters, mostly. Used to anyway, back home. Not really sure what I am right now, honestly, since I'm not home. A few nearby kindred exchanged glances, some amused, some plainly skeptical. 1 or 2 watching with the sharper, more careful attention of people recalculating something. A hero, Ashford repeated, letting a thread of condescension into the word, testing to see if it would land. How quaint. And this training, this discipline that produces heroes where you're from, is it available to others? Reproducible? Saitama actually laughed at that, a short, genuine sound that surprised even Isabel standing a step behind him. Believe me, I've had people ask before, back home too. I trained really hard for like a year and a half. 1,000 push-ups, 1,000 sit-ups, 100 squats, 10-kilometer run, every day, no air conditioning, almost died a couple times from heat stroke, honestly. And then I just got like this. Nobody who's tried to copy it has ever gotten anywhere close. I think it might have just been luck, honestly. Bad luck some days. Bad luck, Ashford said flatly, clearly expecting a lie and finding, instead, something he didn't have a category for. Yeah, I told your prince the same thing, and Adelina too, when she did her whole, the mind-reading thing. It's not really a fun power to have. I don't feel anything anymore when I fight. No fear, no rush, nothing. Every fight just kind of ends before it starts. It's honestly the worst part of my life, if I'm being real with you. The ballroom, or at least the cluster of it standing close enough to hear, had gone quiet in a different way now. Not skeptical anymore, but genuinely uncertain. Several centuries of collective experience with liars and boasters and desperate men overselling their own danger, running headfirst into someone who very plainly wasn't doing any of that. Ashford recovered his composure first, though something in his eyes had shifted, recalculated. Well, however you came by it, Mr. Voss vouches for you, and Elysium's peace protects you here regardless. I do hope, for the city's sake, that your stay proves as brief and uneventful as the prince suggests." He inclined his head, the smallest fraction of a bow, and withdrew back toward his own circle, already leaning in to murmur something to a younger Ventru at his elbow. Isabel exhaled, low, at Saitama's shoulder. "That went better than it could have." "Did it?" He seemed kind of mad. He's Ventru. They're always kind of mad. It's practically a clan trait. "What matters is he didn't push, and he didn't dismiss you either, which means he's already filing you away as something to plan around instead of something to ignore." She steered him gently toward the edge of the room, away from the thickest cluster of watching eyes, giving him, and herself, a breath of space. "That's actually the best outcome you could have gotten from him tonight." They made it perhaps 10 more steps before a new voice cut in, low and warm, and edged with an amusement that felt, immediately, more dangerous than Ashford's cold curiosity had been. "You'll have to forgive Julian. He's been Primogen long enough to forget that not every conversation is a chess match." The woman who'd spoken detached herself from a knot of younger, more casually dressed kindred near the bar, leather and denim among the silk and tailoring elsewhere in the room, a visual statement Saitama didn't fully understand the weight of yet. She was striking in an unpolished way, dark hair shaved close on one side, tattoos winding up one forearm, a confident, loose-limbed way of moving that had nothing of Voss's careful 3th-century poise in it. "Celine Vasquez," she said, offering a hand. No test in the grip at all, just a straightforward, friendly shake. "Anarch Baron, north side of downtown. I don't usually bother with Elysian politics, but I made an exception tonight, because frankly, everyone in the city's been talking about you for 2 straight days and I wanted to see for myself." She looked him over, openly, with none of Ashford's veiled contempt, just genuine, unhidden interest. "You know, most things that walk into this city with your kind of reputation come in swinging, trying to carve out territory or make a name. You're standing here in a rented suit eating shrimp off a toothpick like you got dragged to a work function. Pretty much exactly what happened, yeah." Celine grinned, sharp and real. "I like that. Refreshing, honestly, compared to the usual." Her tone shifted, just slightly, still light, but with something more deliberate underneath it now. "Look, I'll be straight with you, since straight seems to be your whole thing. The Camarilla is going to want to keep you close, controlled, useful to them without ever quite calling it that. That's just what they do with anything powerful that lands in their lap. Voss will be polite about it, Ashford less so, but the shape of it's the same. If you ever get tired of being somebody's guest," she put a light, pointed emphasis on the word, "the Anarchs don't do owners, we do allies. Might be worth remembering, whenever this city starts feeling smaller than you'd like." "I'll keep that in mind," Saitama said, honestly unsure what else there was to say to that. "That's all I ask." Celine glanced past him, toward where Voss stood in another conversation, and her grin sharpened further, something almost mischievous in it now. "Enjoy the party, hero. I've got a feeling it's about to get a lot more interesting around here." She melted back into her own crowd before Saitama could respond, leaving him standing beside Isabel with the distinct, uncomfortable feeling of a man who'd just been recruited without quite agreeing to anything. "That," Isabel said quietly, "is exactly the kind of thing I warned you about." "Yeah, I'm starting to get the picture." Saitama glanced around the ballroom, Ashford's cold calculation, Celine's warm recruitment pitch, a dozen other pairs of eyes still tracking him from across the room with expressions ranging from wary to hungry to something closer to reverence he genuinely did not know what to do with. "Everybody wants something from me and nobody's actually asked what I want." "Welcome to the jihad," Isabel said, dry. "Nobody ever asks." There were 3 steps from the relative safety of the buffet table. Saitama had his eye on something involving crab that he was determined to sample before the night got any weirder. When the room's temperature seemed to drop, not literally this time, but in the way a room does when everyone in it senses, simultaneously, that something has changed. The doors at the far end of the ballroom had opened, whoever had just walked through them hadn't been announced, hadn't waited for permission, and the entire assembled court, Primogen, Anarchs, ranking kindred of every stripe, had gone still and quiet in a way that made even Ashford's earlier interruption look like background noise. "Who's that?" Saitama asked, low, watching a tall, gaunt figure in a severe black coat move through the parting crowd with unhurried, deliberate steps, flanked by 2 others dressed similarly, none of them bothering to blend into the ballroom's evening wear aesthetic at all. Isabel's face had gone hard, wary, one hand drifting instinctively toward her hip before she visibly caught herself and forced it still, remembering Elysium's peace. "Sabbat," she said quietly. "That's not supposed to be possible. Elysium doesn't extend to them. They don't get invited. They don't just walk in." Her eyes tracked the lead figure. Gaunt, shaven-headed, a rosary wound tight around one fist, as he crossed the ballroom floor with the calm, unbothered confidence of a man who believed, entirely, that he had every right to be there. Something's wrong. Voss needs to know this second, but Voss had already seen. The prince had gone very still near the center of the room, and every Primogen around him had turned, as one, to track the approaching figure with expressions that ranged from outrage to something closer to fear. The gaunt man stopped a respectful, deliberate distance from Voss, inclined his head in something that was almost, but not quite, a mockery of a bow, and spoke into a silence so complete that his voice carried to every corner of the ballroom without needing to be raised at all. "Forgive the intrusion, Prince Voss," said Father Elias Thorn. "I've come a long way tonight, under a flag I don't often fly in Camarilla halls, because I believe your court is currently sheltering something that concerns every soul in this city, mine included." His eyes found Saitama across the room, and held there, burning with a certainty that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with faith. "I've come to see the stranger for myself, and I've come to ask him, plainly, before God and this whole assembled court, exactly what he is, and exactly what he intends to do with power that should not exist in any world I was taught to believe in." The entire ballroom turned as one to look at Saitama, who was still holding a small plate with a single piece of crab balanced on it, caught mid-bite, in what was unmistakably the worst possible moment for the room's collective attention to land on him. He set the plate down with a small, resigned sigh. "Great," he muttered, mostly to himself. "There's always a guy." The silence stretched a beat too long before Voss recovered himself, stepping smoothly into the space between Thorn and Saitama with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 3 centuries preventing exactly this kind of moment from becoming a catastrophe. "Father Thorn," Voss's voice carried the particular chill of a host addressing an uninvited guest with the strained civility Elysium's peace demanded of him. "I confess surprise. The Sabbat does not typically concern itself with courtesy toward this court, let alone attendance at it. Tonight isn't about courtesy toward you, Marcus." Thorn didn't so much as glance at Voss. His attention stayed fixed on Saitama with the unwavering intensity of a man who'd spent decades waiting for a sign and had finally, he believed, been given one. "It's about something bigger than your court, bigger than the Camarilla, bigger than the war my people have fought against yours for longer than this city's had streetlights. I felt something change in the fabric of this town 2 nights ago. My pack felt it. I suspect, if you're honest, your own Tremere felt it too, whatever her name is." His eyes flicked, briefly, to Adelina Cross, who stood near the Primogen cluster with her expression carefully, deliberately blank. "So no, tonight isn't about you, Prince. Tonight is about him." He took a step toward Saitama. Isabel moved automatically to intercept, one hand rising, and Thorn's escort, the 2 Sabbat flanking him, shifted with the sudden readiness of men expecting violence, and for one taut, suspended second the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. 3 centuries of Elysium tradition, and the promise of consequence, the only thing keeping 4 separate parties from becoming a bloodbath in a hotel ballroom. "Everybody relax," Saitama said into that silence, in the same flat, faintly bored tone he'd used to diffuse an argument over parking. "Nobody needs to grab anything. I'm not gonna do anything, and it looks like he's not either, so let's just talk. That's what he said he wants, right? Talking?" Isabel lowered her hand, slow, watching Thorn's escort do the same, though neither side's tension actually eased, just paused, held in reserve. Thorn studied Saitama for a long moment, up close now, the 2 of them the only still points in a ballroom full of frozen, watching Kindred. Whatever the priest had expected, and it was clear from his expression that he'd expected something, some visible mark of the terrible thing his scripture had promised him, he wasn't finding it in the plain, unremarkable face in front of him. "You don't look like an ending," Thorn said finally, quiet now, almost to himself. "I get that a lot too," Saitama said. "Look, man, I don't know what you're expecting here, but I'm just a guy. I got dropped into your world by accident. I want to go home. And in the meantime, I'm trying really hard not to break anything else. That's it. That's the whole story." "That is not the whole story," Thorn said, and something in his voice sharpened, the certainty in it hardening back into edges. "I have read words older than this city, stranger, words copied from archives that predate the Camarilla's founding, that speak of a figure who walks among us without crown or clan, unbound by the blood, unmoved by our rights, a figure the eldest of our kind would fear, because he owes nothing to the order they've built across 1,000 years of jihad. I did not come here tonight to threaten you. I came here to ask you, before this whole court, whether you understand what you represent to people who've spent their whole existence believing certain things could never be touched, and whether you intend to touch them anyway." The ballroom had gone utterly silent, save for the string quartet, which had, at some point, simply stopped playing, without anyone noticing exactly when. Saitama considered the question with more visible seriousness than he'd given anything else all evening. "Honestly," he said, "I don't want to touch anything. I don't want a crown. I don't want territory. I don't want to be anybody's weapon or anybody's prophecy. I just want to find my way home and eat some decent food before then. And if people leave me alone, I'll leave them alone right back. That's genuinely it. If your scripture's got some big destiny picked out for me, I gotta be honest, it's gonna be disappointed, because I've never once in my whole life done something because a book told me I was supposed to." Thorn stared at him for a long moment, searching, Saitama could tell, for the lie, the way Ashford had searched earlier, the way Adelina had searched with her strange gray eyes, and found something that terrified her instead of comforted her. Whatever the priest found this time, it seemed to land differently. "I believe," Thorn said slowly, "that you believe that. Good, because it's true. But belief and truth are not always the same coin, Mr. Saitama, and power like yours does not stay idle simply because its bearer wishes it to." Thorn's eyes swept the ballroom. Voss, Ashford, Celine Vasquez still watching from the edge of the crowd with sharp, calculating interest. Every ambitious kindred in the room already, visibly, running the calculus of what a being like this meant for their own plans. "Look around you. You've been in this city 3 nights and already the Camarilla courts you as a guest, the Anarchs court you as an ally, and I've walked into a room I'm not welcome in just to lay eyes on you myself. Power like yours does not get to simply opt out of the war it's been dropped into the middle of, however much you might wish it could. Everyone here is already deciding what you're for. The only question left is whether you decide first, or let them decide for you." It was, Saitama had to admit, an uncomfortably fair point, and he stood there for a moment turning it over with the same flat, considering expression he might give a genuinely tricky grocery store coupon policy. "So what do you want from me then?" he said finally, "since apparently everybody wants something. Tonight, nothing." Thorn's expression eased, fractionally, the burning certainty banking down into something more measured. "I wanted to see you with my own eyes, and to say plainly, in front of this court, that my people are watching. Not as enemies, not yet, and I would genuinely prefer it stay that way. Because I do not believe the Sabbat, for all our strength, could stand against what I saw in that alley footage if it ever turned against us in earnest. But watching. If the Camarilla tries to leash you or the Anarchs try to weaponize you, or you decide on some night none of us can predict, that this world's rules simply don't apply to you anymore, my pack will know, and we will act, whatever the cost." He inclined his head, the same near mockery of a bow he'd offered Voss. "That is all I came to say. I'll trouble your Elysium no further tonight, Prince Voss. With your permission, I'll take my leave." Voss, visibly relieved that this was ending without violence inside his own ballroom, inclined his head in return with the stiff, formal courtesy of a man granting exactly the minimum required. "See yourselves out the way you came, Father, and do not make a habit of it." Thorn turned to go, his 2 silent escorts falling in step behind him, but paused after a few strides, glancing back one final time. "For what it's worth," he said, to Saitama, "I hope you're exactly what you say you are. A man, nothing more. This city, this whole tired old war we've all been fighting since before your country existed, could use one honest thing dropped into the middle of it, even if it never means to be honest on purpose." And then he was gone, through the same doors he'd entered, leaving behind a ballroom full of kindred who had, in the space of 10 minutes, watched their entire understanding of the city's balance of power get quietly, thoroughly rearranged. The party did not so much resume as limp forward under its own momentum. The quartet started playing again. Conversations restarted in lowered, urgent tones, but the easy social churn of earlier in the evening had curdled into something more watchful, more calculating. Saitama, given a wide, respectful berth by most of the room now, finally made it to the crab. "You handled that well," Isabel said, low, appearing at his elbow again as he worked through a plate that had, at this point, become a small mountain of shellfish. "Did I? I was mostly just trying to keep the room from turning into a fight." That guy seemed like he really believed all that prophecy stuff. He does. Sabbat priests aren't performing zealotry, most of them. They actually believe it, all the way down, and that makes them more dangerous, not less, because you can't out-negotiate faith the way you can out-negotiate ambition. Isabel glanced across the room to where Voss stood in a tight, urgent huddle with Ashford and two other Primogen, all four of them speaking in low, rapid tones with the particular intensity of people rewriting a plan in real time. "Everybody in this room just got a live demonstration that you're the single biggest variable in this city's balance of power, and every single one of them is already figuring out how that changes their next move." "Great," Saitama said, around a mouthful of crab. "So it's gonna get worse before it gets better." "Probably, yeah," he chewed, considering the ballroom, the careful, watchful faces, the currents of ambition and fear and calculation moving under a veneer of chandelier light and string music. 3 centuries of a slow, patient, brutal political war he'd stumbled into by accident, looking for a discount on cabbage. "You know," he said after a while, "back home, when I fight something, it's usually pretty simple. Monster shows up, I punch it, it's over. Everybody's happy, or at least everybody's alive, and I go home and figure out what's for dinner. This," he gestured loosely at the whole room, "this is a lot more complicated than that." "Welcome to Unlife," Isabel said. "Nobody ever actually wins here. You just survive long enough to see what the next problem looks like. That sounds exhausting." "It is." She allowed herself the smallest, tired smile. "You get used to it, or you don't, and this city eats you eventually, same as it's eaten 1,000 others before you." Across the ballroom, Marcus Voss finally broke away from his huddle with the Primogen, straightened his jacket and began making his way back toward them with the deliberate, composed stride of a man who had, in the last 20 minutes, made several decisions he did not particularly like and was now going to have to live with anyway. "Mr. Saitama," he said, arriving at Saitama's shoulder with a faint, tired courtesy that hadn't been there earlier in the evening. "I believe we should speak, privately. Tonight, if you're willing. I think events have rather accelerated our timeline." Saitama set down his plate, the small mountain of crab shells finally, reluctantly, abandoned. "Yeah," he said. "I figured you'd say that." They spoke in a private room off the main ballroom, away from the music and the watching eyes, Voss pacing slowly in front of a cold, unlit fireplace, while Isabel stood by the door and Saitama sat, once again, in the most comfortable chair available. "The Sabbat's interest changes things," Voss said, without preamble. "Not because I believe Father Thorn intends violence tonight. His kind rarely announces intentions they mean to act on immediately, which is itself the concerning part. But his presence here, tonight, in front of the entire court, means every faction in this city now knows something Camarilla intelligence would have preferred to control the release of ourselves. Ashford is already pushing for tighter containment. Celine Vasquez, I have no doubt, is already drafting whatever pitch she intends to make you the moment my back is turned. And somewhere out there, my Nosferatu are telling me, quietly, that word is beginning to travel beyond this city's borders entirely, to San Francisco, to San Diego, possibly further. "So what do you want me to do about it?" Saitama asked. "Nothing, tonight." Voss stopped pacing, turned to face him directly, and for the first time all evening, the careful, composed mask he wore like armor slipped enough to show something genuinely, quietly tired underneath it. "I want you to understand, plainly, what I am trying to build around you, because I think you deserve that honesty, given how honest you've been with me. I intend to keep you safe and keep this city stable, for as long as it takes Adelina to find you a way home. That is my entire goal. But I am one prince in one city, and I do not control the Sabbat, and I do not control the Anarchs, and I increasingly suspect I do not fully control my own Primogen's ambitions either. now that they've seen what you can do. You're saying it might get worse. I am saying, Voss said quietly, that I believe, very soon, someone in this city is going to test you in earnest. Not with words in a ballroom, but with force. Somewhere it can't be dismissed as an accident or a misunderstanding. I do not know who. I do not know when. I only know that a city this old, sitting on this much buried ambition, does not go 3 nights without someone deciding to gamble everything on a single decisive move. He met Saitama's eyes, and there was something almost like an apology in it. I would ask you when that night comes to remember that whatever they throw at you, this city, most of the people in it, mortal and kindred both, are not your enemy. They are simply caught, the same as you are, in a war that started long before any of us were born. Saitama was quiet for a moment, turning that over. I'll try to remember that, he said finally. But I'm not going to promise I'll hold back if somebody actually comes at me for real. Last time I tried real hard to be gentle, and a guy still turned to dust. I don't really know how to do less than everything, Marcus. I wish I did. I really do. Voss held his gaze for a long moment, and something in his ancient, careful eyes settled into a kind of resigned acceptance. The look of a man who had asked for something he already knew, deep down, he wasn't going to get. Then I suppose, he said quietly, we had all better hope this city finds the sense not to test you. Outside the private room, beyond the ballroom, beyond the hotel's carefully maintained illusion of an ordinary building on an ordinary street, the city of Los Angeles kept turning through its long night, mortal and kindred alike, unaware mostly of how close the whole fragile architecture of it had just come to a fracture none of them would have survived. Somewhere out past the hills, in a warehouse chapel lit by candles, Father Elias Thorne knelt again before his wall of scripture and prayed, for the first time in years, that he had read the passage wrong. He did not, in his heart, believe that he had. The test, when it came 4 nights later, and it did not come from the Sabbat. Julian Ashford had spent those 4 nights doing what Ventru Primogen did best, calculating. He'd sat with the footage from the alley a dozen times over, had Adelina Cross's assessment repeated back to him twice by 2 different sources to make sure he hadn't misheard the impossible parts, and had come, slowly, to a conclusion that none of his fellow Primogen shared, and that he had, so far, kept entirely to himself. Voss was managing this wrong, not through malice, not through incompetence. Voss was, whatever else Ashford thought of him after decades of Primogen politics, a genuinely capable prince, careful and patient in the way 3 centuries taught a man to be. But careful and patient was the wrong tool for a variable this size, and Ashford had watched enough princes across enough decades fall to threats they'd tried to manage gently instead of neutralizing outright. You did not host something like this in your own home, feed it breakfast, and hope it stayed grateful. You tested it, quietly, on your own terms, before someone else, the Sabbat, the Anarchs, some rival prince up the coast, tested it on theirs, and came away with an advantage Los Angeles couldn't afford to concede. So on the 4th night, while Voss was occupied elsewhere in the city handling a genuinely unrelated territorial dispute that Ashford had, in point of fact, quietly helped engineer as a distraction, 6 of his most capable Ventru enforcers, not fledglings like the unfortunate Marcus Ruiz, but disciplined, trained, decades deep in their power, converged on the guest wing of Voss's estate with orders that were, technically, not orders at all. Ashford had been very careful about that. He had simply mentioned, to the right people, in the right tone, that it might be instructive to know exactly what this stranger could do under actual pressure, from people who knew how to apply it. He had not told anyone to attack. He had merely arranged for 6 ambitious, capable kindred to conclude, independently, that tonight was the night to find out. Saitama was in the estate's kitchen at the time, 3 in the morning, eating cereal directly from a mixing bowl because the ghoul staff had finally, after 4 days, stopped hovering nervously every time he opened a cabinet, when the first one came through the window. He heard it before he saw it. Glass, fast, followed immediately by a second window on the opposite wall doing the same thing. And by the time he'd turned around with a spoon still in his hand, the kitchen had 6 new occupants arranged in a loose, professional perimeter, all of them moving with the controlled, silent economy of people who had rehearsed this. "Okay," Saitama said, setting the bowl down on the counter with a small, resigned sigh. "Seriously? The lead enforcer, A broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and the flat, assessing eyes of someone who'd done this kind of work for a very long time, didn't answer. He simply raised one hand, and the temperature of the room dropped several degrees as something Saitama couldn't see but could feel pressed against him. A heavy, suffocating weight settling over his mind like a wet blanket. An unmistakable attempt at dominate. The kind of command that Isabel had explained to him once over dinner, bent the will of mortals and lesser kindred alike for centuries. Saitama blinked at him. Was that supposed to do something? The enforcer's flat eyes flickered, the first crack in the professional composure, and he tried again, harder this time. Saitama could tell by the way the air itself seemed to thicken with the effort of it. 300 years of Ventru bloodline, concentrated into a single, forceful command, aimed directly at a mind that simply had nowhere for it to land. "Kneel," the enforcer said, out loud this time, voice carrying the weight of discipline behind the single word, a command that should have dropped a mortal to the floor without a second thought, and had, in the enforcer's considerable career, never once failed to move even the most stubborn of his own kind. "No thanks," Saitama said, and picked his cereal bowl back up. That was the moment the room's remaining professionalism evaporated entirely. 2 of the 6 moved at once, genuinely fast. Faster than anything Saitama had faced in this city so far. Faster even than the frantic, hungry lunge of that first fledgling in the alley. These 2 moving with the trained, economical speed of predators who'd survived long enough to make speed into an art form. One came low, aiming to take his legs out. The other came high, claws already extending, aiming for the throat. Saitama sidestepped the low attack without looking at it, the way a person might step around a puddle they'd noticed out of the corner of their eye, and caught the second attacker's wrist between 2 fingers, the exact same motion he'd used on Marcus Ruiz 4 nights earlier. Except this time, having learned something from that outcome, he adjusted, redirecting the vampire's own considerable momentum sideways, instead of stopping it dead, sending the enforcer crashing through the kitchen island in a spray of splintered granite and scattered cereal boxes instead of into dust. He was still breathing, or whatever the vampiric equivalent was, groaning, dazed, half-buried in what used to be a very expensive countertop. "See?" Saitama said, mostly to himself, satisfied. "That's better. Nobody has to turn into dust if I'm careful about it." The other 4 didn't slow down to appreciate the restraint. They came in a coordinated rush now, all 4 at once. Clearly some kind of practiced formation meant to overwhelm a single target from every angle simultaneously, the kind of tactic that had presumably worked against plenty of dangerous things over the decades these enforcers had spent honing it. It did not work particularly well against Saitama, who spent the next 11 seconds moving through the kitchen with the mild, faintly put-upon efficiency of a man tidying a room that kept generating new mess. He caught one enforcer by the collar and set her gently but firmly through the pantry door. He deflected a set of claws aimed at his face with the flat of his cereal bowl, which shattered on impact without so much as chipping his composure, and used the resulting distraction to tap a third attacker in the chest, hard enough to send him skidding the length of the kitchen and out through the already broken window he'd originally come in through. The lead enforcer, still trying and failing to land a dominate command that simply had no purchase to grip, found himself, a moment later, pinned gently but immovably against the refrigerator by a single hand pressed flat against his chest. Not squeezing, not crushing, just holding him there the way you'd pin a stack of papers under a book. "Look," Saitama said, to the 4 now incapacitated, none of them dust, all of them very much still present and increasingly aware of exactly how badly this had gone. "I get that you're testing me or whatever. Ashford sent you, right?" "Had to be him. Nobody else here's got a reason." He glanced at their stunned, furious, disbelieving faces and let out a small, tired breath. "I really didn't want to break anything tonight. This was actually going pretty well until you guys showed up." By the time Isabel arrived, alerted by a ghoul who'd heard the commotion and, with admirable presence of mind, called her directly instead of Voss, who was still 20 minutes out, she found the kitchen in a state of genuinely impressive disarray. A shattered island, 2 broken windows, cereal scattered across most of the floor, and 6 Ventru enforcers in various states of dazed incapacitation, none of them destroyed, none of them even seriously injured beyond bruised pride and, in one case, a mouthful of granite dust. Saitama sat on a bar stool amid the wreckage, sweeping cereal off the counter into a fresh bowl with the air of a man determined to finish his midnight snack regardless of circumstance. "They started it," he said, before she could ask. "I want that on record." Isabel surveyed the scene. The restraint of it as much as the damage. 6 trained enforcers left conscious and coherent enough to give a full account of what had happened, when she knew for a fact that Saitama could have ended every single one of them in the time it took her to walk from the car, and felt something shift in her assessment of him that had been building slowly since that first rooftop conversation. "Ashford's going to have a very difficult conversation with Voss about this," she said finally. "Good," Saitama said, around a fresh mouthful of cereal, "because I'm getting genuinely sick of people testing me instead of just asking what I want." The conversation Isabel predicted happened within the hour, in Voss's study, and it was, by the account of the ghoul stationed outside the door, the coldest exchange the estate's staff had witnessed in over a decade of service to the prince. "6 of my Primogen's enforcers," Voss said quietly, "in my own home, attacking a guest under my explicit protection, while I was conveniently occupied elsewhere in the city with a dispute that I am now beginning to suspect was manufactured specifically to occupy me. Tell me, Julian, how badly I am misreading the situation." Ashford, to his credit, did not deny it. 3 centuries of Primogen politics had taught him that outright denial in the face of overwhelming evidence only compounded the offense. "I acted to protect this court, Marcus. You've been managing this creature with kid gloves for 4 nights, on the strength of one dinner conversation, and Adelina's word that he seems harmless. I wanted to know definitively before the Sabbat or the Anarchs found out for us exactly what we're dealing with, should he ever turn against this city in earnest." "And what did you learn?" Ashford's jaw tightened. "That 6 of my best enforcers, working in coordination, with the element of surprise, achieved nothing, that he restrained himself, deliberately, when destroying all 6 would have taken, by every account I've gathered, less effort than it took him to eat his breakfast." He met Voss's eyes, and something in his cold composure had genuinely cracked, the first honest fear Voss had seen from him in years. "I learned, Marcus, that we cannot fight this thing. Not with force, not with numbers, not with anything this court currently possesses. I learned that the only reason my enforcers walked away tonight is because he chose to let them, and I have spent 30 years building this court's defenses around the assumption that choice was never the variable that mattered most." The study was quiet for a long moment. "You endangered this court," Voss said finally, "for an answer I already possessed, and that I would have shared with you had you simply asked, instead of gambling 6 lives in this city's fragile peace on proving it yourself. Would you have believed it, truly, before tonight?" Voss considered the question and found, to his own quiet frustration, that he did not have a confident answer for it. "No," he admitted, "perhaps not fully. But that is precisely why this court needs restraint now more than ever, Julian. Because the temptation, for men like us, is always to test the thing we fear, until testing becomes provoking, and provoking becomes the very catastrophe we were trying to prevent." He turned the ring on his finger, once, and let it still. "You will apologize to him, personally, and you will counsel your fellow Primogen, all of them, that this city's survival now depends entirely on nobody else making your mistake." Ashford's expression, for just a moment, showed something that might have been genuine shame beneath the wounded pride. "And if he doesn't accept the apology?" Voss looked toward the window, toward the wrecked kitchen wing somewhere beyond it, toward a city that had just come within a hair's breadth of learning exactly how badly it had underestimated the stranger currently, he'd been told, finishing a 3rd bowl of cereal as though nothing at all had happened. "Then we will have learned," Voss said quietly, "exactly how much patience a being like that actually has left to spend on us. And Julian, I do not think any of us want to find out what happens the night it runs out." Word of the kitchen incident didn't stay contained to Voss's estate for more than a night. It couldn't. Not in a city built on whispered information economies. Not with 6 humiliated enforcers and a shattered kitchen island as evidence. By the following evening it had reached every faction that mattered, and each of them drew a different conclusion from it. The Camarilla Primogen, chastened, fell into an uneasy, watchful silence, Ashford's miscalculation serving as object lesson enough that nobody else moved to repeat it. Celine Vasquez, hearing the account secondhand through Anarch channels, laughed out loud in the middle of a safe house meeting and told her people that whatever else this Saitama was, he clearly wasn't going to be bullied into anyone's camp, which, she said, made him worth courting properly instead of testing like an animal. And in a warehouse chapel across town, Father Elias Thorne knelt before his wall of scripture and felt something cold settle in his gut that had nothing to do with fear for himself, because word had reached further than Los Angeles. It had reached, within 3 nights, a place Thorne had hoped it wouldn't reach at all, down through Sabbat channels that ran deeper and older than any single city's politics, past his own archbishop, past the regional war council, all the way to something that had been sleeping, dormant and patient, in the ruins beneath an abandoned mission 200 miles south of the city, for longer than anyone currently alive had walked the earth. The thing that woke was not Sabbat. It predated the Sabbat, predated the Camarilla, predated the very schism between them. It had been old when Rome was young, had watched the embrace itself change and mutate across 1,000 years of kindred history, had gone to ground centuries ago rather than involve itself in the increasingly petty, increasingly mortal-flavored squabbles of its descendants. And it had woken now, on this particular night, because something in the deep, ancient blood connecting all kindred everywhere had shuddered, 4 nights ago, at the exact moment a boy named Marcus Ruiz stopped existing in an alley off 6th Street. Its name, in the oldest records that still survived it, was Kalen Voss's own bloodline traced back 7 generations to reach. A detail Marcus Voss himself did not know, and would not have wanted to. It called itself, when it bothered to use a name at all, the Warden. Saitama, entirely unaware that his kitchen altercation had rippled outward into something with considerably older, considerably more patient teeth, spent the following 2 days doing what he'd been doing since he arrived, eating, mildly annoying the ghoul staff by insisting on doing his own laundry, and periodically asking Adelina Cross, with the polite, dogged persistence of a man checking on a slow home repair, how the search for a way home was coming along. Slowly, Adelina told him, on the 2nd evening, in the small workroom she'd claimed in Voss's estate, walls lined with old texts and stranger instruments, a faint smell of copper and burnt herbs hanging in the air. I've traced the general shape of the working that brought you here. It wasn't kindred sorcery, or at least nothing in the Camarilla's tradition of it. Something older, something that touches on planar mechanics in a way our blood magic mostly avoids, because the risk of getting it wrong is considerable. She looked up from a spread of hand-drawn diagrams, exhaustion evident even on a face that hadn't needed sleep in 4 centuries. I believe I can construct a working to send you back. I do not yet know if it will be safe, or precise, or whether it will land you back in that exact alley or somewhere considerably worse. I would ask for patience. I've got nothing but time, Saitama said. It's kind of my whole deal these days. He left her to her work and was making his way back through the estate's long hallway, considering whether it was too late to raid the kitchen again, when Isabel intercepted him near the stairs, her expression tighter than he'd seen it since the ballroom. We've got a problem, she said. A new one. Voss wants everyone in the study. The study, when Saitama arrived, held a gathering considerably more tense than any he'd seen there yet. Voss standing rigid near the fireplace, Adelina summoned down from her workroom with visible reluctance, Des Okafor's face flickering on the wall monitor with an expression Saitama hadn't seen on the Nosferatu before. Genuine, unguarded fear. Talk to me, Voss said the moment the door closed. Something's moved south of the city, Des said, voice tight, none of its usual warm, unhurried rasp. 2 nights ago, my Warren networks had eyes on the old mission ruins outside San Juan Capistrano for decades. Nothing down there but rubble and a rumor, or so we always figured. Tonight the rumor woke up. He pulled up a grainy image, taken from a great distance, blurred by darkness and rain, a tall, gaunt silhouette standing amid collapsed stone, utterly motionless, facing north, facing the city. Whatever that is, Isabel, it's been down there since before this city had a name, and it's been still, according to every account I've ever managed to dig up, for at least 400 years. It is not still anymore. Adelina had gone very pale, staring at the image with an expression Saitama recognized now. The same look she'd worn the night she'd tried to read his limits and found none. Adelina? Voss's voice was carefully controlled, the way it got right before very bad news. I know that name, she said quietly. only from the oldest Tremere archives, the ones we're not meant to discuss outside the highest circles of the clan. The Warden, a Methuselah, older possibly than that word even properly covers. Pre-Camarilla, pre-Sabbat, pre-schism entirely. Legend says it went to ground rather than take a side in the wars that shaped the modern kindred world, because it judged all of it, every faction, every ambition, every clan, beneath its notice. She looked up, and her gray eyes found Saitama across the room with a weight that made the air feel thinner. It has not moved by any record I can find in 4 centuries, and it is moving now, 4 nights after something erased one of your childer in an alley, Marcus, in a manner that should have been physically impossible. You're saying I woke it up, Saitama said slowly. I am saying, Adelina replied, that something in the world's oldest, deepest blood felt what you did that night, the way a spider feels the smallest tremor at the very edge of its web. And I am saying that whatever wakes after 400 years of silence to investigate a tremor like that is not doing so out of curiosity. The room was quiet for a long moment. Outside, rain had started again, ticking steady against the tall windows, indifferent to the fact that somewhere south of the city, something ancient enough to remember the Crusades had opened its eyes for the first time in living memory and turned its attention, with slow, patient certainty, toward Los Angeles. How dangerous, Voss said finally, are we discussing? Adelina's answer, when it came, carried none of her usual careful hedging. Marcus, I could not find the bottom of what's standing in your guest wing right now. I do not know what a creature that old, that patient, that deliberately hidden from every faction's history is even capable of. I know only that it has never once, in 4 centuries of records, acted without absolute certainty that it would win whatever it set out to do. If it's moving toward this city, it is not moving to observe. Every eye in the room turned, slowly, toward Saitama, who stood near the door with his hands in his pockets, absorbing the news with an expression that had shifted, for the first time since he'd arrived in this world, into something that looked almost like genuine interest. Huh, he said. Old, huh? Been sleeping 400 years? Mr. Saitama, Voss said carefully, I would ask you not to sound quite so. I'm not trying to be weird about it, Saitama said, though the faintest, almost imperceptible note of something had crept into his flat voice. Not eagerness, exactly. Nothing so obviously hopeful as that, but a kind of cautious, long-buried curiosity he hadn't let himself feel in longer than he could easily remember. It's just everybody I've fought here so far has felt like the first few floors of a really tall building. This is the first time anybody's described something that sounds like it might actually be near the top. He caught himself, and something in his shoulders dropped again, the old, familiar weariness sliding back over his features like a mask returning to its resting place. It probably won't be, though. It never is. But, yeah, I'd rather know it's coming than not. Isabel watched him carefully, and saw, in that brief, unguarded moment, something she hadn't let herself fully consider until now. That whatever quiet, resigned peace Saitama had made with his own endless, hollow strength, some small, buried part of him was still, after everything, hoping, however faintly, however many times that hope had been disappointed, that this time might finally be different. How long? Isabel asked, turning back to Des's flickering image on the monitor, before it reaches the city. Des was quiet for a moment, studying the grainy footage, the motionless, patient silhouette standing amid 4 centuries of dust and ruin. At the pace it's moving, he said finally. 3 nights, maybe 4. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and indifferent, on a city that had just been given its answer to how much worse this could get. The 3 nights before the Warden's arrival passed in a strange, suspended tension unlike anything the city's kindred had experienced in living memory. Not the frantic mobilization of open war, because there was, as Voss pointed out grimly to his assembled Primogen, genuinely nothing conventional to mobilize against something Adelina Cross couldn't even find the bottom of, but a slow, deliberate settling of the whole court into a kind of held-breath readiness. Voss spent the first night making calls he hated making, to rival princes up and down the coast, San Francisco and San Diego, and even, grudgingly, to contacts in Sabbat-held territory, because a threat this old didn't respect the borders drawn between factions, and Voss had learned, across 3 centuries, that pride was a luxury a prince could not afford when the alternative was annihilation. Most of what came back was unhelpful. Half-remembered fragments, contradictory legends. One elder in San Francisco who simply laughed, cold and humorless, down the phone line, and told Voss that if the warden was truly waking, the wisest thing Los Angeles could do was evacuate every kindred it could and let the city burn without them in it. Adelina worked without sleep, if such a thing could be said of her, cross-referencing every fragment of Tremere lore she could access, trying to build some working, some ward, some contingency that might matter even slightly against something this old. What she found mostly confirmed what she already feared. The warden had never lost. Not once. Across every fragmentary fourth-hand account she could piece together. It had simply never needed to try twice. This Okafor kept eyes on the thing's slow, unhurried progress north, feeding updates through a network of Nosferatu spotters who reported, with increasing unease, that the warden did not seem to be hurrying, did not seem in fact to be doing anything but walking, a patient, deliberate stride up the coast that covered ground far faster than any mortal pace should allow, and yet never once looked, on any grainy footage they managed to capture, like it was exerting any effort at all. Celine Vasquez, for her part, called an emergency council of her own Anarch leadership and made a decision that surprised even her own people. She reached out to Voss's estate directly, offering for the first time in a decade of uneasy Anarch Camarilla tension in the city, a temporary truce and the full cooperation of every Anarch fighter she commanded, should it come to open conflict. "I don't like the Camarilla," she told Isabel bluntly, over a phone call neither of them particularly enjoyed having. "But I like the idea of this city surviving a lot more than I dislike Voss's politics. Whatever's coming, we're not going to be dumb enough to sit this one out and let it pick us off separately after it's done with you." Even Father Elias Thorne, 3 nights into a fasting vigil that had left him gaunter than usual, sent word through back channels that his pack would not interfere, whatever happened, not out of any newfound trust for the Camarilla, but because his scripture, the same scripture that had brought him to Elysium a week earlier, spoke also, in fragments he'd never fully understood until now, of a warden of the old silence, whose waking presaged the end of whatever city it chose to walk into. He did not, his message made clear, intend to stand in the way of anything that might stop that from happening. The whole city, in other words, Camarilla, Anarch, Sabbat alike, had arrived, independently and without ever quite saying so out loud, at the same conclusion. Whatever was walking north through the dark, it was bigger than their war, and the war would have to wait. Saitama spent the 3 nights training, which was, Isabel noted with some bemusement, not something she'd expected from a man who could apparently erase vampires by accident. "I don't really need to," he admitted, on the second night, in the estate's sprawling back garden, moving through slow, careful forms under a sky heavy with unfallen rain. "Training doesn't really do anything for me anymore, if I'm honest. I think I hit some kind of ceiling a long time ago where getting stronger just stopped being a thing that happens to me the normal way. But it helps me think. And honestly," he paused, mid-form, looking up at the dark sky. "It's been a long time since I had a reason to actually prepare for something. Feels kind of nice, not gonna lie, even if it probably won't matter." "You really think this thing might be different?" Isabel said. It wasn't quite a question. "I don't know. Probably not." "Nothing ever is." He resumed the form, movements precise, unhurried, a man going through motions that had once meant everything to him, and now meant, mostly, a way of passing time that felt less empty than most other ways. But it's been 400 years since it woke up for anything. That's gotta mean something, right? Even if it's not enough. Even if it's just a little bit more than everything else has been. Isabel watched him for a while in silence, the rain finally beginning to fall, soft and steady, neither of them moving to get out of it. "For what it's worth," she said eventually, "whatever happens, this city's grateful you're standing between it and whatever's coming. Whether or not it turns out to be the fight you're hoping for." Saitama stopped, looked at her, and something in his flat, weary expression softened, just slightly, into something that might have been real gratitude. "Yeah," he said. "Thanks. That actually means something too." The warden crossed into the city's outer limits on the 3rd night, a little after midnight, and the entire kindred population of Los Angeles felt it happen the way you'd feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm. A pressure behind the eyes, a wrongness in the blood. Every vampire in the city, regardless of clan or faction, going still for one shared, instinctive moment, as something ancient and patient crossed an invisible threshold none of them could have named. As his spotters lost visual contact 11 minutes later, all of them simultaneously, cameras and eyes alike, as though the warden had simply decided it no longer wished to be observed, and the observation had, without any visible mechanism, ceased to be possible. It reappeared, precisely, deliberately, at the wrought iron gates of Marcus Voss's estate 40 minutes after that. No fanfare, no dramatic arrival, simply present, where a moment before the long drive had been empty, a tall, gaunt figure in robes the color of old ash, face obscured beneath a hood, utterly, perfectly still. Voss's entire household staff, ghouls and kindred alike, felt the pressure of its presence roll across the grounds like a physical weight the moment it arrived, and every alarm, every ward, every carefully constructed magical defense Adelina had spent 3 sleepless nights weaving into the estate's foundation simply stopped working, not broken, not overwhelmed, just quietly, politely set aside, the way you'd move an obstacle you didn't consider worth the effort of destroying. Saitama was in the garden when it arrived. He felt nothing. No pressure, no wrongness, no instinctive vampire dread. But he saw Isabel go rigid beside him, saw every light in the house's east wing flicker once and steady, and knew, before anyone said a word, exactly what had just walked through the gate. He set down the water bottle he'd been holding. "Guess that's our cue," he said. The warden did not wait to be received, did not wait for Voss to gather his court, or Adelina to finish whatever last desperate ward she was weaving. It simply began walking, unhurried, across the grounds, directly toward the garden, toward the one presence on the entire estate that its ancient, patient senses had apparently decided was worth the trouble of a personal visit. Voss reached the garden at a dead run a moment later, robe half-fastened, flanked by Isabel and 2 of his remaining household guard, arriving just in time to see the tall, hooded figure stop, precisely 20 feet from where Saitama stood waiting, utterly still, utterly unhurried, radiating a silence that seemed to swallow the falling rain itself before it could hit the ground. For a long suspended moment nobody spoke. Then the hood lowered, and a voice that sounded like it had been carved out of centuries rather than spoken through a throat, dry and ancient and terribly, terribly calm, broke the silence. "So," the warden said, looking at Saitama with eyes the color of old, dead stars, "the tremor has a shape." Up close, the warden did not look like much of anything at all. That was, Saitama would think later, the strangest part of the whole encounter. No glowing eyes, no impossible proportions, no theatrical display of power the way every other dangerous thing he'd met in this city seemed compelled toward. Just a tall, gaunt figure in robes the color of old ash, skin drawn tight and gray over a face that might have been carved from the same stone as the ruins it had woken from. Eyes like dead stars fixed on him with the patient, unblinking attention of something that had spent 4 centuries deciding this moment was worth waking up for. "You're the thing everyone's been panicking about," Saitama said. "You don't look that scary, honestly. No offense. None taken." The warden's voice carried no inflection, no warmth, no anger, just a flat, ancient certainty, like stone speaking. "Scariness is a mortal concern. I have not needed to be scary in 400 years, because I have not needed anything at all in 400 years, until 4 nights ago, when the deep blood shuddered at something it had no name for. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, studying him the way a jeweler studies a stone, before deciding whether it's worth cutting. I have walked 200 miles to answer a simple question. What are you? I've been getting that a lot, Saitama said. Short version, I'm not from here. Fell through a hole looking for cheap cabbage, ended up in your world by accident, want to go home eventually. That's really it. That is not what I asked. The warden took a single step closer, and the ground beneath its foot did not so much as shift, no sound of contact at all, as though it weighed nothing, or as though the world had simply decided not to notice its passage. I did not ask where you came from. I asked what you are. I have watched this world's kindred rise and fall across 1,000 years. Watched antediluvians wake and sleep and wake again. Watched empires of blood built and burned by things that believed themselves eternal. I know the shape of every kind of power this world has ever produced. mortal and kindred and stranger things besides. You are none of them. And that troubles me, stranger, more than anything has troubled me in 4 centuries of sleep. Behind Saitama, Voss had gone rigid, one hand raised to hold Isabel and his guard back. Every instinct in 3 centuries of political survival screaming at him that this was not a conversation he could insert himself into without becoming, instantly, a casualty of it. I'm just a guy who trained really hard, Saitama said, and there was something almost apologetic in it now. The specific tiredness of repeating an explanation he already knew wouldn't land the way he wanted it to. That's genuinely the whole story. No secret bloodline, no ancient prophecy, no cosmic destiny. I did 1,000 push-ups a day for a year and a half and something just broke, I guess, in a good way. I've been trying to explain that to people since I got here and nobody ever believes it, but it's true. The warden was silent for a long moment, its dead star eyes unmoving, unreadable. I believe you, it said finally, and something in its ancient flat voice shifted. Not warmth, nothing so alive as that, but a kind of grim, settling recognition. That is precisely what troubles me. You did not seize power through blood, through pact, through diablerie, through the 10,000 desperate bargains our kind has struck across 1,000 years to claw ourselves a little further from death. You simply decided to become strong, through nothing but will and repetition, and the universe, for reasons I suspect not even you understand, agreed to let you. That is not power as this world has ever produced it. That is power as this world was never meant to allow. He took another step closer, close enough now that Isabel's hand went, instinctively, to the knife at her belt, uselessly, hopelessly. I did not wake to fight you, stranger. I woke to determine whether you are a wound in the world that must be closed, or merely an anomaly that will pass on its own, once you find your way home. And which one do you think I am? I do not know yet. The warden's head tilted again, and for the first time something almost like genuine curiosity flickered behind those dead eyes, which is, itself, remarkable. I have not said those words. I do not know. In 400 years. Voss finally found his voice, stepping forward despite every instinct telling him not to. Because whatever else was true, this was still his city, his court, his responsibility. Warden, I am Marcus Voss, prince of this city. If there is a way to resolve this without... I did not come to speak with you, prince. The warden didn't so much as turn its head. Your court, your jihad, your endless small ambitions. These mean nothing to me, and meant nothing to me 4 centuries before you were embraced. I came for him. If you value your city, I would suggest you not insert yourself between us. Voss went quiet, jaw tight, and Isabel's hand tightened on his arm, holding him back. Not out of disrespect, but out of the same cold, clear-eyed calculation that had kept her alive as sheriff for 11 years. Some fights were not yours to join, no matter how much you wanted to. Saitama, for his part, had gone very still, watching the warden with an expression that had shifted, subtly, from mild curiosity into something more focused. The particular, quiet attention he gave to things that might, possibly, finally, actually matter. So what happens now? He asked. You gonna test me too? Everybody else in this city's already had a go. Everyone else in this city, the warden said, tested you out of fear, or ambition, or foolishness. I do not share those failings. I have lived too long for fear, accumulated too much already to need ambition, and foolishness was burned out of me before your entire species existed in its current form. It raised one hand, slow, deliberate, palm open, no weapon, no visible discipline gathering around it, nothing so crude as a display. I intend to test you, because I must know, and there is only one way, in 400 years of accumulated patience, that I have ever found to truly know anything about power. I intend to see what is beneath it. The garden had gone utterly silent, even the rain seeming to pause, hanging suspended in the air around them. If I am wrong about you, the warden continued, if you are the wound I fear you might be, this city will not survive what I do next, and neither, I suspect, will you. But if I am right, and you are merely what you claim, an anomaly, a strange and harmless accident of a world not our own, then no lasting harm need come to anyone at all. Its dead eyes fixed on Saitama with something that, on any other face, might have almost read as respect. I would have your consent, stranger, before I begin. I do not force what does not need forcing. Will you let me see what you are? Saitama looked at the warden for a long moment, ancient, patient, terrifyingly calm, radiating a stillness that felt, for the first time since he'd fallen through that manhole cover, like it might genuinely be standing on ground he hadn't already walked 1,000 times before. Behind him he could feel Voss's tension, Isabel's readiness, the whole fragile architecture of a city holding its breath around this one impossible conversation. "Yeah," Saitama said finally, and something in his flat voice had gone quiet, almost hopeful, the particular fragile hope of a man who'd been disappointed so many times he'd stopped letting himself expect anything different. And yet, here, now, standing in front of the first thing in this whole strange world that had genuinely, honestly said I do not know about him, couldn't quite stop himself from hoping anyway. Let's see what happens. The warden did not attack the way anything else in this city had attacked. There was no lunge, no claw, no burst of discipline visible to the naked eye. It simply closed its raised hand, slowly, deliberately, into a fist, and the world around Saitama changed. He felt it first as pressure, not on his body but somewhere deeper, a sensation he had no real name for because nothing in 8 years of fighting gods and planet-eaters and cosmic horrors had ever quite produced it. The feeling of being read, thoroughly, completely, down to some foundational layer of himself he hadn't known was accessible to anything. Not pain, not exactly, but intrusive in a way that made something old and animal in the back of his mind want to flinch, even though the rest of him, the part that had long since stopped flinching from anything, simply stood and let it happen. Behind him, Isabel felt the temperature of the garden plummet, watched the grass beneath the warden's feet blacken and curl, watched the fine rain suspended in the air begin, impossibly, to freeze mid-fall, tiny crystalline shapes hanging motionless around the two of them, like the world itself had stopped to watch. "Interesting," the warden said, and for the first time, its ancient, flat voice carried something that was almost unmistakably surprise. "You do not resist. Most things resist, instinctively, the moment I begin to look. Gods have resisted me. Antediluvians, in the few instances I have troubled myself to test one, resisted me with everything their accumulated centuries could muster. You simply stand there, as though there is nothing in you worth protecting from my sight." "Is there supposed to be?" Saitama asked, and his voice, remarkably, stayed level, though something in his jaw had tightened, the only visible sign of the effort it was costing him to hold still under whatever was happening. "There is always supposed to be something, a core, a center, the thing a being becomes when every performance, every mask, every acquired strength is stripped away and only the truth of them remains." Quote, the warden's dead star eyes had widened, fractionally, the closest thing to visible alarm Saitama had seen on that ancient, weathered face. "I am looking for yours now, stranger, and I am finding." It stopped. The frozen rain around them hung suspended for one long, unbearable second. And then, all at once, the warden's fist opened, and the pressure vanished as suddenly as it had come, and the ancient being took an actual physical step backward. The first retreat, Saitama would learn later from Adelina's shaken, disbelieving account, that anyone had ever recorded from the warden in the entirety of its recorded existence. "Tiredness," the warden said, very quietly, almost to itself. "That is what I found, beneath everything. Not malice, not hunger, not the desperate, grasping will to power that drives every kindred I have ever met, every mortal tyrant, every god I've had cause to measure. I looked for your center, stranger, expecting to find the engine of a weapon, or the hollow, ravenous nothing of a true monster. And I found, instead, a being who has simply grown exhausted of winning and kept fighting anyway, because there was nothing else left for him to be." The garden was silent. Even Voss, tense and ready at Isabel's side, found he had nothing to say. "I have lived a very long time," the warden continued, and something in its ancient voice had shifted again, settling into a register that was not quite warmth, but sat closer to it than anything Saitama had heard from it yet. "Long enough to watch power corrupt nearly everything that ever held enough of it. I have seen antediluvians become gods in their own minds and monsters in everyone else's. I have seen mortals given a fraction of your strength burn cities to ash, simply because they could, because strength without consequence is the single most corrupting force this world has ever produced." It studied him, unblinking, and for the first time, its dead eyes carried something that was unmistakably, quietly, respect. "You have held strength beyond anything I have ever measured, stranger, for what I suspect has been years, and it has not made you cruel. It has not made you hungry. It has made you tired and lonely and, I think, kinder than most things half your strength ever managed to be. That is not a wound in the world. That is the rarest thing I have ever encountered in 400 years of sleep and 1,000 more of waking before it. Saitama let out a breath he hadn't fully realized he'd been holding. So, he said, and there was something almost unsteady in his voice now, the flat deadpan cracking just slightly around the edges. Does that mean we're not fighting? We were never going to fight, stranger. The warden inclined its head, slow, deliberate, something that was almost unmistakably a bow. I do not measure worth through combat. I measure it through what remains when combat becomes unnecessary. And you, it seems, have very little left to prove to anyone, least of all to me. It paused, considering him with something that had softened, fractionally, into what might, on a face capable of more expression, have looked like genuine sympathy. I am sorry, stranger, that this world has given you so little that could still surprise you. I suspect that is the truest wound you carry, and it is not one I know how to close. Something in Saitama's chest loosened, an old familiar ache easing just slightly at being seen. Finally, by something old enough and honest enough to say the quiet part out loud without flinching from it. Yeah, he said quietly. That's about right. The warden turned slowly, taking in the tense, watching figures of Voss and Isabel and the household guards still frozen at the edge of the garden, the whole fragile architecture of a city that had spent 3 sleepless nights bracing for annihilation. Prince Voss, it said, and its voice had returned, mostly, to its flat, ancient register, though something in it had eased. Your city was never in danger from me tonight, provided your guest was what he claimed to be. He is. You may stand down whatever defenses you've exhausted yourselves constructing this past 3 nights. It paused, considering. I would, however, offer you a warning, freely, in exchange for the trouble of my visit. This city has been fortunate, these past nights, that the anomaly which fell into it happened to be a kind and tired man rather than a hungry one. Fortune of that kind does not repeat itself indefinitely. I would suggest you spend less of your court's energy testing him, and more of it preparing for the night something considerably less kind falls through a hole the same way he did. Voss, still visibly shaken, managed a stiff, formal nod. I'll take the warning seriously, Warden. See that you do. The warden turned back to Saitama one final time, and something in its ancient, weathered face, carved from 4 centuries of stillness, softened into an expression that was almost unmistakably close to warm. I do not know if you will find your way home, stranger. I do not know if this world has anything left capable of giving you what you're truly looking for, which I suspect is not strength, and never was. But if you are ever in need, genuinely in need, not merely tested, not merely provoked, the ruins south of this city will remember your name, and I will come, if you call it. And then, without ceremony, without the dramatic vanishing act Saitama half expected, it simply turned and walked back the way it had come, unhurried, patient, its footsteps making no sound at all against the wet grass, until the darkness past the estate's gates swallowed it whole, and the frozen rain around the garden resumed falling, all at once, as though the world had simply remembered it was supposed to keep moving. Voss let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like 3 nights straight. Isabel's hand finally, slowly, released the hilt of her useless knife. Saitama stood alone in the middle of the garden for a long moment, rain soaking through his clothes, staring at the space where the oldest, most honest thing he'd met in this entire strange world had just disappeared, feeling something in his chest that he hadn't let himself feel in longer than he could comfortably remember. Not disappointment, for once. Not the old hollow flatness of another fight that hadn't been a fight at all. Something closer, strange and unfamiliar, to being understood. Well, he said finally, to nobody in particular, wiping rain from his face. That was different. The warden's departure should have ended the tension gripping the city. Instead, it did something more complicated. It proved, decisively, publicly, beyond any argument Ashford or anyone else could raise, that Saitama was not a threat to be managed but a fact to be reckoned with. And facts like that, Marcus Voss had learned across 3 centuries, didn't calm a city's ambitions. They redirected them. Within 2 nights the redirection had a name, Archbishop Cassian Drake. Father Elias Thorne's superior in the Sabbat's Western hierarchy, had, until this point, remained a distant, cautious presence, content to let Thorne gather intelligence quietly, unwilling to commit pack resources to a situation nobody in the Sabbat fully understood. The warden's waking changed his calculus entirely. Where Thorne had read prophecy and dread in the old scripture, Drake read opportunity. If something existed in this world capable of making an ancient Methuselah retreat, capable, by extension, of tearing through anything the Camarilla could field to defend itself, then the Sabbat's oldest, simplest doctrine applied. Power that could not be controlled should be seized, or destroyed before a rival seized it first. He did not ask Thorne's opinion before mobilizing 3 war packs and beginning the drive north toward Los Angeles. Thorne felt the mobilization order land like a physical blow, standing in his warehouse chapel at 2 a.m, staring at a message he'd hoped, right up until it arrived, that his own archbishop would have the wisdom not to send. "The stranger is a weapon lying in the street," the message read. "We will pick it up before the Camarilla learns to hold it properly, or we will break it before they can. Prepare your pack. We march within the week." Thorne stood there for a long time after reading it, the candlelight flickering across a wall of scripture he had copied, verse by verse, over decades of genuine faith. Faith that had, 4 nights ago, looked into a bored, tired man's eyes across a ballroom and found something considerably more human than any prophecy had prepared him for. He made a decision that night that would have gotten him executed by his own order had anyone learned of it in time. He picked up his phone and he called Isabel Reyes. "You're telling me," Voss said, 20 minutes after taking the call himself, pacing the length of his study with a speed that betrayed how badly the news had rattled him, "that a Sabbat priest who walked into my Elysium a week ago, threatening judgment, is now warning us that his own archbishop is marching 3 war packs on this city." "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Isabel confirmed, standing rigid near the door, phone still in hand. "He says Drake doesn't want territory. He wants Saitama, as a weapon, or dead if he can't have him as a weapon, and either outcome ends with this city as collateral damage. Thorne's pack won't join the march. He's breaking with his own archbishop to warn us, which tells you exactly how badly he thinks this could go if Drake gets what he wants." "How many is 3 war packs, precisely?" 40, maybe 50 Sabbat, cross-trained, blood-bonded to Drake personally, backed by at least 2 Tzimiche vicissitude specialists, and, according to Thorne, an anti-tribu elder old enough that even the Sabbat's own records are vague about her origin. Isabel's jaw was tight. "This isn't a raiding party, Marcus. This is an invasion force, built specifically around the assumption that overwhelming numbers might succeed where 6 of Ashford's enforcers failed." Adelina, seated near the fireplace with her diagrams still spread across her lap, looked up with an expression that had gone carefully, deliberately blank. The look she wore when she was working through implications too large to voice comfortably. "They're wrong, of course!" Numbers won't succeed where subtlety and skill already failed catastrophically. If anything, throwing 50 kindred at him at once simply gives him 50 targets in the same place, with none of the restraint he showed Ashford's men, because desperation, and 50 attackers coming at once from every angle, isn't a scenario he can afford to handle gently. The room went very quiet at that, the full shape of the danger settling over everyone in it at once. Not danger to Saitama, who by every account so far remained functionally unkillable by anything this city could field, but danger to the city itself, caught in the blast radius of an invasion force that intended to provoke exactly the kind of overwhelming response nobody wanted unleashed on Los Angeles streets. "Where is he?" Voss asked. "Saitama. Right now. Kitchen," Isabel said. "Where else? Get him. Get Celine Vasquez on the phone too. If Drake's bringing 50 Sabbat into this city, I want every Anarch fighter she commands ready to hold a perimeter, whatever our history." And Isabel, Voss's pale eyes had gone hard, decisive, 3 centuries of careful political survival, narrowing down into the specific, focused clarity of a prince facing a threat too large for anything but total commitment. "I want Ashford's remaining enforcers deployed to evacuate every mortal residence within 6 blocks of wherever this ends up happening. Whatever comes next, I will not have this city's civilian population caught in it." "And Saitama?" Isabel asked. "What do we tell him?" Voss was quiet for a moment, looking toward the window, toward a city that had, in the space of 10 days, gone from an ordinary night's uneasy peace to the brink of a war it had never asked for, and could not survive without the very anomaly that had started it all. "We tell him the truth," Voss said finally, "that an army is coming for him, that this city will burn around him if it comes to open battle, and that I am asking him, not ordering, because I have no authority left to order him anything, to help me end this before it starts, rather than after." Saitama informed of all of this over a plate of reheated leftovers in the estate's kitchen, the same kitchen that had, less than 2 weeks ago, hosted a considerably smaller-scale disaster. Listened to the whole account with a stillness that had by now become familiar to everyone watching him. Isabel had learned to read it. The flatter his expression went, the more seriously he was actually taking something. 50 of them, he said, when Voss finished. "Coming here. For me. For you. And by extension for this city. Whether you're the intended target or simply the excuse," Voss confirmed. "I won't pretend the choice in front of you is simple. If you leave, if you go somewhere far from this city, tonight, before Drake's forces arrive, there is a chance, not a certainty, but a chance, that his war packs stand down once their reason for marching no longer exists in reach. It would spare this city the worst of what's coming, possibly at the cost of leaving you exposed and alone in a world you already don't understand, with an army looking for you regardless of where you go. Or you stay," Isabel said, quiet, direct. "And we face this together. Here, on ground we've had time to prepare, with the Anarchs backing us, and every advantage a defending city can muster. It's the more dangerous option for this house, for this court, possibly for the mortals living nearby if it goes badly. But it's the option where this ends in one night, decisively, instead of dragging you and whatever danger follows you across half the continent, while Drake's forces hunt you down one city at a time." Saitama set down his fork, and for a long moment he didn't say anything at all, turning the choice over with the same careful, deliberate weight he'd give any decision that actually mattered to him. He thought about Isabel on the rooftop, telling him what it cost to hold ground. He thought about Voss's tired, careful eyes, 3 centuries spent trying to keep a fragile peace from collapsing under the weight of things far older and hungrier than any single prince could manage alone. He thought about the warden's parting words, about the rarest thing it claimed to have found in 400 years. Not strength, but the fact that strength hadn't hollowed him out entirely. He thought, mostly, about a boy named Marcus Ruiz, 6 weeks dead when he died a second time, and the specific, sick weight of having caused that even by accident, even in self-defense, and about what it would mean, if he ran, to leave this city to face 50 Sabbat alone, because he'd decided his own safety mattered more than theirs. "I'm not running," he said finally. "I don't really do that. Never have." Voss let out a slow, measured breath, something in his 300-year-old composure loosening, just slightly, with something that looked almost like relief, and almost like grief, for what the decision was going to cost, regardless of how it ended. "Then we prepare," he said, "tonight, because Drake's forces will reach this city within 4 nights, and I do not intend for this court, or this city, to be caught unready a second time." Saitama nodded, pushed his half-finished plate aside, and stood. 4 nights, he said, mostly to himself, testing the shape of the deadline. "Okay." He looked at Isabel, at Voss, at Adelina still seated with her diagrams, all of them watching him with the particular, fragile hope of people who had decided, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, to trust him with everything they had left to lose. Let's make sure it's enough. The 4 nights before Drake's arrival became, in Voss's estate, a study in controlled desperation. Adelina abandoned her planar research entirely, redirecting every hour toward defensive wardcraft instead. Not to stop Saitama this time, but to protect the mortals and lesser kindred caught in whatever radius the coming battle carved out of the city. She wove containment sigils into the estate's foundation stones, borrowed a dozen Tremere apprentices from Ashford's chantry to help lay a wider net of ward lines across 6 surrounding blocks, and slept, when she slept at all, in 2-hour increments broken by the need to check her own work for flaws a mistake this size couldn't afford. Celine Vasquez arrived on the second night with 30 Anarch fighters at her back, and the sight of them filing into Voss's estate grounds, leather and denim mixing uneasily with the household's usual Camarilla polish, marked, Isabel noted quietly to Voss, the first time in over a decade that Anarch and Camarilla forces had stood shoulder to shoulder in this city, for anything other than a temporary grudging ceasefire. "Don't get used to it," Celine told Voss, when he thanked her for the commitment. "This isn't an alliance, Marcus. This is me deciding I'd rather stand next to you than get caught between two forces that are both bigger than mine. Ask me again next month whether we're friends." "I wouldn't dream of it," Voss said, and meant it. Ashford, chastened but not idle, threw himself into logistics with the grim focus of a man trying to make up for a mistake that had nearly cost the city everything. Coordinating evacuation routes, quietly buying out the leases on 3 apartment buildings within the projected battle radius, under false pretenses, to clear them of mortal tenants before Drake's forces arrived, running supply lines for the fighters gathering at the estate. Father Elias Thorne came on the 3rd night, alone, his own small pack left behind out of a caution that bordered on self-preservation, and knelt before Voss in the estate's foyer in a gesture that cost him, visibly, everything his order's pride had ever taught him to value. "I can't fight my own archbishop," he said, rising, refusing to meet anyone's eyes directly. "Not openly. My pack would be marked apostate the moment I did, hunted by our own order for the rest of whatever unlife we've got left. But I can tell you where Drake means to make his approach, and I can tell you the one thing about Vera Kalinsky, the anti-Tribu elder riding with him, that I've learned no other living soul in this city knows." "Which is?" Isabel asked. "She's never lost a fight she chose to have," Thorne said quietly. "Not because she's the strongest thing in any given room, because she never enters a fight until she's already certain of how it ends. If she's still coming, despite everything Drake surely told her about what happened to Ashford's men, it means she's found something, some angle, that she believes gives her an edge even against him." His eyes found Saitama, standing quietly near the back of the gathered room. "I don't know what that edge is, but I'd stake what's left of my faith that she has one, and that it's the only reason she agreed to march at all." The words settled over the room like a physical weight. Saitama, for his part, absorbed the warning with the same flat, careful attention he'd give any piece of genuinely useful intelligence. "Good to know," he said. "I'll keep an eye out for anything weird." He spent most of the 4th day, the last full day before Drake's forces were projected to arrive, not training, not preparing in any of the ways the rest of the estate was preparing, but sitting in the garden where the warden had tested him, turning over a conversation he hadn't been able to fully shake since it happened. Isabel found him there in the late afternoon, the sun low and orange over the estate's walls, and sat down beside him without being invited, something that had become easy between them over the last 2 weeks, in a way neither of them had particularly planned for. "You're quiet," she said, thinking about what the warden said, about being tired. He picked at the grass, an idle human gesture that looked strange on someone capable of what he was capable of. "It's the first time anything's actually said it out loud like that. Not 'wow, you're so strong,' not 'please don't hurt us,' just, you're tired, and that's not nothing, that matters. I've been fighting for years and nobody's ever really said that to me before. Not even my friends back home, not really. They see the strength. Nobody really sees the rest of it." "I think I'm starting to," Isabel said, quiet, honest in a way that cost her something to say out loud. 2 weeks ago I thought you were the most dangerous thing that had ever walked into this city. I still think that's true, technically. But it's not the first thing I think about anymore when I look at you." Saitama glanced at her, something unguarded in his expression that she hadn't seen from him before. Not the flat deadpan, not the weary resignation, just a simple, quiet openness. "What do you think about instead?" "That you're the first thing to walk into this city in longer than I want to admit that actually seems to care what happens to the people in it, instead of just what happens to itself." She held his gaze, steady. "That's rarer than raw power around here, Saitama. Rarer than you'd think." He didn't say anything for a moment, just sat with that, the orange light fading slowly toward evening around them, the quiet, fragile piece of a garden that both of them knew would not stay quiet much longer. "Tomorrow's gonna be bad," he said finally. "Probably. You scared?" Isabel considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. "Yes," she admitted. "Not of you. Of losing people I've spent decades keeping alive, in a fight none of us actually chose. Of this city I've bled for, more than once, ending up worse off no matter how it goes." She looked at him. "But less scared than I would be, if you weren't standing between this city and whatever Drake's bringing. That matters too." Saitama nodded slowly, looking back out over the darkening garden, and for the first time since arriving in this strange, blood-soaked, endlessly political world, something in his chest settled into a kind of quiet, unfamiliar resolve that had nothing to do with strength at all. "Then let's make sure it goes the right way," he said. "Whatever it takes." Behind them, in the estate, lights burned late into the night, as a city's worth of uneasy allies finished preparing for a war none of them had asked for. And 40 miles south, moving steady and unhurried through the dark, Archbishop Cassian Drake led 3 war packs and an elder who never lost a fight she chose, toward a confrontation that would decide, by morning, what kind of city Los Angeles was going to be. They came at 2 a.m., through the industrial corridor south of downtown that Thorne had warned would be their approach. 3 war packs moving in disciplined, silent formation, the kind of coordinated march that spoke of decades, centuries, of practiced warfare between rival kindred sects. Drake led from the center, a broad-shouldered figure in ceremonial black, a warhammer strapped across his back that looked less like a weapon and more like a statement. Beside him walked Vera Kalinsky, small, unassuming, wrapped in a gray traveling coat, moving with none of the aggressive posturing of the warpack around her. Just a quiet, patient certainty that unsettled Isabel more than anything Drake's 50 fighters could have projected. Voss's forces held the perimeter Adelina had warded, Camarilla enforcers and Anarch fighters standing shoulder to shoulder along a 6-block containment zone, mortal residences emptied under Ashford's careful cover stories. The whole stretch of industrial street lit only by sodium streetlights and the promise of violence. Saitama stood alone at the center of it, in the open lot where both sides would inevitably converge, hands in his pockets, waiting. "Interesting," Drake said, stopping 30 feet out, studying the plain, unremarkable man standing between him and the city he'd come to claim. "I was told you didn't look like much. I confess I expected exaggeration." "You get that a lot when people describe me," Saitama said. "Look, man, I really don't want this to turn into a whole thing. Your priest already tried the talking route, and it went fine. Can we just do that again?" "Father Thorne is a man of faith who mistook mercy for wisdom," Drake said. "I am not burdened by his hesitation. I did not march 3 war packs across 200 miles to negotiate with an anomaly. I marched to claim a weapon, or to prove to my archbishopric that no weapon existed worth claiming." He drew the warhammer from his back, and around him 49 Sabbat shifted into readiness, claws and blades and discipline-charged auras flaring to life across the assembled war packs like a field of grim, hungry stars. "Vera assures me this will not take long." Saitama's eyes moved to the small, unassuming woman standing at Drake's side, who had, so far, said nothing at all. "You're the one they warned me about," he said. "The one who never loses a fight she picks." "That's a generous way of putting it," Vera said, and her voice was soft, almost gentle, entirely at odds with the weight of reputation behind her. "I don't fight fights I'm not certain of. I've had a very long time to learn the difference between confidence and certainty, and I only ever act on the second one. So what makes you certain about this one?" Vera smiled, small and quiet. "You'll see." Drake raised the warhammer, and the warpack surged forward as one, and the battle for Los Angeles began. What followed was, by every account gathered afterward, less a battle than a demonstration, though not the kind Drake had marched 200 miles to witness. Saitama moved through the first wave of Sabbat fighters with the same weary, careful economy he'd shown since the very first night, redirecting instead of destroying wherever he could manage it, sending vampire after vampire skidding, crashing, tumbling harmlessly across the lot, instead of turning to dust, a restraint that cost him focus and effort in a way raw destruction never would have. Around the perimeter, Voss's mixed Camarilla Anarch force held the containment line against the warpacks that peeled off to test it, Isabel at the center of the fighting with a ferocity that surprised even her own people, Celine's Anarchs matching the Sabbat's brutal efficiency blow for blow. It was, for the first several minutes, exactly the lopsided demonstration everyone but Drake had expected. Then Vera Kalinsky finally moved. She didn't charge. She didn't summon discipline in any form. Adelina, watching from the ward line with growing alarm, could immediately identify. She simply walked, slow and unhurried, directly toward the heart of the fighting. And as she walked, something in the air around her began to shift. A low, keening hum, barely audible beneath the chaos of battle, that made every kindred within 100 feet, friend and enemy alike, feel their vitae go suddenly, inexplicably cold. "She's pulling something," Adelina said, urgent, into the comm link connecting her to Voss's forward position. "I don't recognize the working. It's old, older than anything in our archives. Marcus, I think she's not fighting Saitama directly at all. I think she's—" The hum sharpened into a single, resonant note, and every kindred on the battlefield, Sabbat and Camarilla and Anarch alike, 50-plus combatants locked in the middle of a running fight, staggered, simultaneously, as something ancient and merciless reached into the deep well of vitae that powered every one of them and pulled. Isabel went to one knee, gasping, feeling her own considerable strength drain out of her like water through cupped hands. Around her, Voss's enforcers and Celine's Anarchs stumbled, weakened, several collapsing outright, disciplines guttering out mid-cast. Even Drake's own warpacks faltered, caught in the same indiscriminate working, because Vera Kalinsky's oldest, most dangerous trick, the one she never used unless absolutely certain of a fight, because of exactly what it cost her, was not a weapon aimed at one target. It was a working that fed on the blood of everything kindred within its radius, drawing on all of it at once, converting an entire battlefield's worth of borrowed vitae into a single, devastating channel. She turned the full weight of it, finally, entirely, on Saitama. He felt it as pressure, not pain exactly, the same way the warden's testing hadn't quite been pain, but a heavy, suffocating wrongness pressing in from every direction at once. An attempt, he realized distantly, to simply overwhelm him with sheer accumulated force, rather than any single blow, the collected borrowed strength of 50 vampires and 4 centuries of Vera Kalinsky's patient hoarding of exactly this kind of desperate, last resort working, funneled into one convulsive, city-shaking effort. For one genuine, suspended moment, standing in the middle of a battlefield gone suddenly and eerily quiet beneath the weight of Vera's working, Saitama felt something press against him that registered, for the first time since he'd arrived in this world, as actual resistance. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then it simply wasn't there anymore. The pressure dissolving the way morning fog dissolves under direct sun, not overcome so much as recognized, finally, fully, for what it had always been, a great deal of borrowed strength, still nowhere close to enough. Saitama exhaled, slow, and looked at Vera Kalinsky across the ruined lot, and for the first time all night, something like genuine, quiet disappointment crossed his flat features. "That was actually kind of impressive," he said, for like 2 seconds. Vera stared at him, and for the first time in what her reputation suggested was centuries of unbroken certainty, something in her calm, patient composure finally, visibly cracked. "That's not possible," she said, quiet, almost to herself. "That draw has broken elders 3 times your apparent strength." "It has never. Not once." "Yeah," Saitama said, and crossed the distance between them in a single, unhurried step, close enough now that Vera, drained from the effort of her own working, could do nothing but stand and face what was coming. "I get that a lot too." He didn't destroy her. He'd learned, by now, exactly how much restraint a tap like this required, and he applied precisely that much. Enough to drop her, gently, into unconsciousness, sparing her the fate Marcus Ruiz had suffered on the very first night of all this. Around the battlefield, as Vera's working collapsed with her, vitae flooded back into every drained kindred at once, Isabel gasping as her strength returned, Voss's forces and Celine's Anarchs staggering back to their feet in confused, grateful relief. Drake, watching his elder fall in a single motion, watching his one genuine advantage, the certainty Vera had promised him, the edge Thorn had warned them all about, evaporate in less time than it took to describe, understood, with the sudden sick clarity of a man watching his entire campaign collapse in real time, that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "Fall back," he said, and then louder, "Fall back." Nobody heard him in time to matter. The warpacks, already reeling from Vera's drained working and Saitama's continued, methodical advance through their ranks, broke into open, chaotic retreat, and what had begun as an invasion ended, within minutes, as a rout. Drake's forces scattering into the industrial dark, Voss's mixed defense force holding the line and letting them go rather than risk the casualties a full pursuit would cost, exactly as Voss had instructed before the battle began. Drake himself made it perhaps 200 yards before Saitama caught up to him, not with violence, but simply appearing, suddenly, directly in his path, close enough that the Archbishop's warhammer, raised in a desperate final swing, connected with absolutely nothing at all, as Saitama simply wasn't where the swing landed anymore, and then was, an instant later, standing close enough to speak. "You should probably stop now," Saitama said. "I don't really want to hurt you. I just want everybody to go home so this can be over." Drake stood, chest heaving with breath he didn't technically need, staring at the plain, unremarkable face of the thing that had, in under 15 minutes, unmade everything he'd spent decades building his reputation on. "What are you?" he said, and it wasn't a challenge this time. It was something closer to genuine broken confusion. "Just a guy," Saitama said, "who really wanted this to not happen tonight. Go home, Drake. Tell your archbishopric whatever you need to tell them. Just don't come back here." Drake looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, lowered the warhammer, and turned, and walked away into the dark without another word. The first and only member of Cassian Drake's chosen title he would carry for the rest of his considerably chastened life, retreating from a battlefield he had never once, in 3 centuries of Sabbat warfare, imagined losing so completely. By the time the sun began threatening the eastern hills, the industrial corridor south of downtown stood empty and quiet, littered with the debris of a battle that had, against every expectation, ended without a single Camarilla or Anarch fatality. A handful of injuries, Vera Kalinsky secured and unconscious in Adelina's custody for questioning, and a citywide understanding, cemented in blood and rout, that Los Angeles was not a city anyone would be testing again for a very long time. Voss found Saitama standing alone near the center of the emptied lot, looking out at the wreckage with an expression that was, for once, harder to read than usual. "You saved this city tonight," Voss said quietly. "All of it. Every mortal in Kindred within 6 blocks who would have been caught in whatever Drake's forces or Vera's working might have done if you hadn't stood between them and us." "Yeah," Saitama said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment, looking down at his own hands, unmarked, unbothered, the same hands that had, over 2 weeks, ended 1 life and spared dozens more. "It's a weird feeling, honestly. Usually after a fight like this, I just feel nothing, empty, like it didn't cost me anything because it never does." He looked up, and something in his tired eyes had shifted, just slightly, into something Voss hadn't seen from him before. This one felt like it mattered. I don't really know what to do with that. Voss studied him for a long moment, 3 centuries of careful political calculation giving way, just this once, to something simpler and more honest. "Perhaps," he said, "it's simply that it did." The week that followed Drake's rout passed in a strange, unfamiliar quiet, the kind of quiet a city only earns after surviving something it genuinely believed it might not. Word of the battle spread fast, the way word always did in Los Angeles' kindred underworld, but the shape of it changed as it traveled, softened by distance, and retelling into something closer to legend than incident report. By the time it reached San Francisco, San Diego, the scattered Sabbat war councils up and down the coast, the story wasn't really about an invasion repelled anymore. It was about a city that had stood, Camarilla and Anarch shoulder to shoulder, against 50 Sabbat and an elder who never lost, and won, decisively, without losing a single defender, because of a stranger who'd walked in off the street looking for cheap groceries, and stayed to make sure nobody got hurt who didn't have to. Marcus Voss found, in the days after, that his standing among rival princes had shifted in ways 3 centuries of careful diplomacy had never quite managed on its own. Calls came in from cities that had never bothered returning his before. Not offers of alliance, nothing so bold, but a new, wary respect. The recognition that Los Angeles had weathered something most of them privately doubted their own courts could have survived. Ashford, for his part, spent the week in a kind of chastened, quiet reflection that didn't entirely suit him, though he made a point of personally overseeing the repair of the estate's kitchen. Twice, in fact. Once for the damage his own enforcers had caused, and once, grudgingly, out of what he insisted was simple professional courtesy, and everyone else recognized as something closer to genuine respect finally, belatedly earned. Celine Vasquez showed up on the estate's doorstep 4 nights after the battle. Not for another recruitment pitch, but simply to sit in the garden with Saitama for an hour, saying very little, the easy quiet of two people who'd stood on the same side of something that mattered and didn't need to dress it up as more than that. "Anarchs don't forget," she told him before she left. "Whatever happens after you're gone, and I hear Adelina's close, this city remembers who stood for it when it counted. That's not nothing, hero. That's actually the whole thing, around here." Father Elias Thorne sent no message at all, which Isabel explained, when Saitama asked, was itself a kind of message. A man who'd broken with his own order to give them warning couldn't risk being seen reaching out again so soon, not without inviting exactly the kind of scrutiny that had nearly destroyed him already. But word reached them, eventually, through careful, indirect channels, that Thorne's small pack had quietly, permanently severed itself from Cassian Drake's chain of command, unwilling to serve under an archbishop who'd nearly gotten them all killed, chasing a weapon that had never wanted to be one. Vera Kalinsky, once she'd recovered enough to speak, spent 3 long nights in careful, guarded conversation with Adelina, not as a prisoner exactly, though she wasn't free to leave either, but as 2 students of very old, very dangerous magic finding, against every expectation either of them had walked in with, something like mutual respect. She left the city on the 4th night, released under a quiet understanding that neither Voss nor Drake's shattered remaining leadership would ever fully explain to anyone. And the last thing she said to Saitama, before she went, stuck with him longer than he expected it to. "In 400 years, she told him, I have never once miscalculated the outcome of a fight I chose to enter. I did this time, and I find, strangely, that I'm grateful for it. It has been a very long time since anything reminded me what genuine uncertainty feels like." She'd almost smiled, then, the first and only time he saw it. "Thank you for that, stranger. It's a rarer gift than you probably realize." Adelina found the answer on the 9th night after the battle, and she found Saitama in the garden to tell him, the same garden where the warden had tested him, where Isabel had sat with him the night before Drake's forces arrived, a place that had become, without either of them quite planning it, the closest thing to a home he'd built for himself in this strange, blood-soaked version of Los Angeles. "I've traced it," she said, without preamble, settling onto the bench beside him with a worn leaf of parchment covered in diagrams that made Saitama's eyes water just looking at them. "The working that pulled you here, it wasn't kindred sorcery at all, in the end. It was a resonance, a thin place between your world and this one. The kind that opens, rarely, when 2 versions of reality brush close enough against each other. Your manhole cover wasn't a portal so much as a seam. I can't recreate the exact conditions that opened it the first time, but I can force a new seam, temporarily, at the same coordinates, and if my calculations hold, and I have checked them more times than I care to admit, it should return you to precisely where you left, the same night, nearly the same moment, as though no time had passed at all where you're from." Saitama absorbed this quietly, looking out over the darkened garden. "So I can go home, tomorrow night, if you wish it, or whenever you're ready. The working won't hold indefinitely once I open it, so there's little sense delaying past a night or 2, but the choice is entirely yours." Adelina studied him carefully, her strange gray eyes softer now than they'd been the first night she'd tried, and failed to find the bottom of him. For what it's worth, and I say this as someone who has spent 4 centuries rarely finding anything worth saying it about, this city is better for having had you in it, however briefly. I don't know what you'll find waiting for you back home, but I hope, genuinely, that it's kinder to you than this world sometimes managed to be. "It has its moments," Saitama said. "Both worlds do, I think. Yours had some good ones, actually. Better than I expected, honestly." He said his goodbyes the following evening, one at a time, in the estate's foyer where he'd first arrived 2.5 weeks ago, dripping wet, and utterly unimpressed by the whole ordeal. Voss shook his hand the same way he had that very first night, except this time there was nothing careful or calculated in it. Just a genuine, 3 centuries earned respect passing between 2 very different kinds of powerful men who'd found, against every reasonable expectation, something like real regard for each other. "The city owes you a debt it can never properly repay," Voss said. "I hope, wherever you find yourself, that it treats you with half the grace you showed mine." "You guys weren't so bad," Saitama said. "Weird, but not bad. Take care of your city, Marcus. It's got some good people in it worth fighting for. Ashford offered a stiff, formal nod that carried, underneath the formality, something that might have genuinely been gratitude. Des's voice crackled through a phone Isabel held up, warm and rasping and sincere, in a way the Nosferatu rarely allowed himself to be. Thanking Saitama for a story he swore he was never going to be able to fully explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. Isabel walked him out to the estate's front steps, the same rooftop quiet settling between them that had marked so much of the last 2.5 weeks, comfortable in a way neither of them had expected when they'd first met on a rain-soaked street with her hand half raised toward a weapon that would never have mattered. "You gonna be okay?" Saitama asked. "After I'm gone, I mean. City's still got a lot going on." "This city's always got a lot going on. That's just what it is." Isabel allowed herself a small, tired smile. "We'll manage. We managed before you got here. We'll manage after. Doesn't mean we won't miss having you around, though, for what it's worth." "Yeah," Saitama said. "I'll miss this too. Weirdly. Never thought I'd say that about a place full of vampires trying to kill me every other night. High praise, coming from you. Honestly, yeah, kind of is." They stood there a moment longer, the estate's lights warm behind them, the city sprawling out dark and vast and complicated beyond the gates, a whole fragile, dangerous, surprisingly human world that had, somehow, over 2.5 strange weeks, come to mean something to a man who'd stopped expecting anything to. "Take care of yourself, Saitama," Isabel said finally. "Whatever's waiting for you back home. You too, Isabel. Try not to get bitten by anything you don't like." She actually laughed at that. Real, warm, unguarded. And it was the last sound he heard from this world, walking down the estate's front steps toward Adelina, who stood waiting near the gate, with the working already beginning to shimmer faintly in the night air. A seam opening quietly between two versions of a reality that had, for a little while, overlapped. The seam closed behind him with no more fanfare than the manhole cover had opened with 2.5 weeks earlier. A shimmer, a soft pressure, and then Saitama was standing, blinking, in the exact spot he'd left. The grocery store still glowing warm and yellow 40 feet away, doors sliding open for the same old woman with the same cart, as though no time at all had passed. He looked down at his canvas bag. The eggs were still fine. He walked into the store, bought his groceries. No cabbage sale, sadly. Some things apparently didn't change, no matter which reality you were standing in. And walked home through streets that made sense again, past street signs that matched the maps in his head. His phone buzzing back to life with 3 missed calls from Genos, wondering where he'd gotten off to. He didn't call back right away. He sat on the edge of his bed instead, groceries still on the counter, and thought about a prince with tired eyes and a genuine sense of duty, about a sheriff who'd learned to see past the strength to the person underneath it, about an ancient, patient thing that had looked into him and found, for the first time in 4 centuries, something worth calling rare. He thought about a city that had needed him, actually needed him, in a way that had left a mark instead of an emptiness. The first fight in longer than he could remember that had cost him something to win and left something behind in exchange. He didn't know if he'd ever see that world again. Adelina's working had been a one-way door, by design, and he hadn't asked her to build another. But for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, sitting alone in his quiet apartment with a bag of slightly too expensive groceries and a phone full of missed calls from a life that had never once needed saving the way that one had, Saitama found himself hoping, genuinely, fully, without the old flat resignation dragging behind it, that somewhere out there, a fragile, complicated, blood-soaked city was still standing, and that somewhere in it, people he'd come to care about were doing exactly what he'd asked of them before he left, taking care of each other. He picked up his phone, finally, and called Genos back. "Sorry," he said. "Got a little sidetracked. You wouldn't believe the week I just had."